Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at www.broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes one concept review item and two study session items, which will be televised on Channel 8 and through live video streaming on Broomfield's website. Council members are attending this study session remotely by video conference. Concept reviews are an opportunity for applicants to present their plans for council's preliminary review. Although official decisions cannot be made by council during the concept review, council may ask questions and make suggestions to the applicant regarding their projects. Comments from the public will be taken on the concept review item only. Public participation is encouraged by calling 855-695-3744 and pressing *3 to be placed in the queue for comment. Please note, if you would like to speak on more than one item on tonight's agenda, you will need to press *3 each time to be placed back in the queue for comment. Public comments will be limited to 90 minutes total per concept review item. The first 1 to 15 participants in the queue will have 3 minutes to speak. The next 16 to 25 participants in the queue have 2 minutes to speak. And if time remains, the next participants in the queue have 1.5 minutes to speak until we reach 90 minutes. Again, the number is 855-695-3744. And don't forget to press *3 to be placed in the queue. Screeners will ask callers for their first and last name, neighborhood, and the agenda item the caller would like to comment on. Please call several minutes before the agenda item and press *3 to ensure that you are in the queue for comments. Following tonight's concept review, council will discuss alternative voting methods and Broomfield's debt policy, including Wendy Gap. The concept review item on tonight's agenda is a proposal for preliminary consideration of a concept plan for a 58,240 square foot industrial building to be located at 11280 Reed Way. We will follow the city standard procedures for concept plan reviews. First, staff will present a summary of the application. Following the staff summary, the applicant will make their presentation. We will then take comments from the public and members of advisory boards. Then the applicant will have an opportunity for final comments, and finally, questions and comments from the city council. Electronic copies of concept review plans are available at broomfieldvoice.com. Copies of comments provided for each plan at broomfieldvoice.com have been provided to the city council and can be found by clicking the correspondence link at the bottom of tonight's agenda. Council members have a copy of the agenda memorandum for this proposal, which I will ask staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good evening. Tonight, Judy Hammer, Senior Planner, is back again to walk us through the Interpark filing number 1. Judy?
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council members. Judy Hammer, representing the Planning Division. This is a concept review, as the Mayor noted, for industrial flex building at Interpark, filing number 1, Replat C, Lot 1, Block 1. Next slide, please. The concept plan is for consideration of a 58,240 square foot industrial building with 15 truck docks, 2 drive-in doors, 2 10-foot high walls to screen the dock and drive-in doors at the east elevation, and approximately 139 parking spaces. On October 20, 2020, City Council reviewed a concept plan proposal to amend this portion of the Interpark PUD plan to permit light industrial land uses on this subject property, which is within the west portion of Planning Area 1. And to add data centers to the light industrial land use category. The applicant has submitted a separate application for the PUD amendment, which is currently under review and is scheduled for hearings on May 10 and June 22 before the Land Use Committee and the City Council, respectively. Next slide, please. The property is located at the northeast corner of West 112th Avenue and Reed Way in the Interpark PUD and identified within that PUD as planning area number 1. For context, the property to the north has built out with 2 large office flex light industrial buildings. A 7-Eleven was built to the east at 113th Avenue and Main Street. Ronnie's Car Wash was approved at the southwest corner of Main Street and West 112th, and Jefferson Academy is located immediately to the west. The next slide includes a video of the site. Next slide, please. Apparently we didn't get that video. There we go. So this video drone begins at the southwest corner of the property at 112th Avenue and Reed Way. It pans to the east along 112th, shows the property looking east. It then pans looking north along Reed Way. And across the street, we're gradually showing northwest to Jefferson Academy. And then panning to the west. It shows views across Highway 36 and Arista. And then we're back over to 112th. And panning to the south, looking across into Westminster with the existing commercial office building. And that concludes the video drone as we come around back and look east along 112th. Next slide, please. The Broomfield Comprehensive Plan land use designation for the property is mixed use commercial, which includes commercial, employment, and limited industrial uses. The proposal is consistent with this designation. Next slide, please. The building is proposed to be oriented diagonally on the lot parallel to Reed Way. Building and other improvements are placed to avoid encroachment over a 75-foot public service utility easement that also runs diagonally across the northeastern portion of the site. You can see the lines on the right side of your screen that run diagonally through there. Parking surrounds the building to the south, west, and east. Next slide, please. This is building elevations from the front at the top and the rear of the building proposed, which is the east side, and that's the lower drawing there. The Inner Park PUD contains specific guidelines with regards to architectural elements, building materials, and colors. The PUD limits building heights to 50 feet. This building is proposed to be 31 feet in height. As mentioned earlier, there are two 10-foot tall screen walls proposed at the east elevation, one that would be situated to the north and the other at the southern end of the building to screen all these dock doors. Next slide, please. This rendering shows landscaping that is proposed at the front of the building and around the perimeter of the site with clusters of trees and shrubs at the rear of the building to provide additional screening of the dock doors. Next slide, please. Notification of the City Council meeting was accomplished per the requirements of the Broomfield Municipal Code. In addition to the standard noticing, notice was posted on Nextdoor and Broomfield Voice. Staff did receive an email from a gentleman in Westminster, and that was provided in the link to the agenda with regards to correspondence. Staff has identified the following key issues with regards to this concept plan for a data center. The property is highly visible along West 112th Avenue. Incorporating architectural elements to create visual interest and to be in compliance with the Inner Park PUD is a very important aspect of this. These may include additional windows, awnings, reveals, changes in pattern, color variations through thoughtful mixing of building materials. Designing the dock doors with careful attention towards the properties to the north and east will also be important. Precluding student parking from Jefferson Academy across Reed Way will also be important for safety. The design should consider ways to deter this potential cross parking. The industrial use is not yet an approved use and is pending review by the Land Use Review Committee and the City Council. The PUD amendment is scheduled again for May 10 and June 22, respectively. The use is in close proximity to a school, and that should be carefully considered. This concludes staff presentation. The applicants are here to review more details about the proposal and to answer any questions as well.
Thank you. The applicant's presentation, as mentioned, is next. Will the applicant's representative please identify themselves for our listeners before beginning your brief presentation this evening?
Yes, hello. My name is Megan Turner with United Properties. Can you hear me?
I can.
Wonderful, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and council members. Thank you for letting us present our project, our potential project here. And Judy, thank you for a very thorough presentation. I will be really brief because Judy's presentation includes a lot of what I have to cover here as well. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Just real briefly about United Properties. We currently own this property that we're discussing this evening. We were the master developer on the entire Inner Park project there. So the 2 industrial buildings to the north, and then the 7-Eleven and the Ronnie's Car Wash were all a part of the original master development. Reedway and 112th were all constructed and at the time of the original development here. And so this is our last pad on this parcel. We are a commercial development company that develops retail, senior housing, industrial, and office as well. And so we're excited to be presenting this next project in front of you here today. Next slide, please. I am on our industrial team, and so I've focused on our industrial developments here, was very much a part of the project across the street, just to the north here. And so this presentation tonight and this application is very similar to those buildings that were constructed across the street. We've developed many industrial buildings all throughout Denver and across the country as well. And this would be one of our latest here, but would match very similarly to the product type and the design and aesthetic that was constructed in the 2 Inner Park Broomfield projects, the 2 buildings across the street that now are home to Swisslog and GC Imports and MKS Instruments. You could go to the next slide, please. Judy covered this as well, but here's our site plan again. This is a 58,000 square foot industrial building. It's a front park rear load building. So office will be situated along Reedway and along 112th there, which is where the parking is primarily. We want those to be close to future office areas. And then we have the truck court situated facing northeast there. And that's really due to the site constraints of having that large overhead power line that's there in that easement that's existing. But to mitigate and to screen from those, we've proposed to have 2 10-foot screen walls on either end of those drive-in doors, exactly the same as what was constructed across the street as well. So we did have those screen walls on the 2 buildings there as well. And this building is going to be constructed on a speculative basis right now, which means we do not have a particular tenant in mind. So we want to make sure that we're designing for ultimate flexibility for a variety of different tenant uses and types within that light industrial designation. So to give you an example of who those tenants might be, Swisslog is a healthcare technology company. MKS Instruments is a technology company. GC Imports is a food manufacturing company. And we're seeing tenants, robotics kind of companies, and a variety of different types of uses that we want to make sure this building can accommodate those different types of tenants. So that's how we feel this design is really flexible for a variety of different light industrial uses. If you could go to the next slide, please. And Judy showed this as well. So this is our landscape plan, our preliminary landscape plan here. I wanted to pull this up here to show just the additional landscape screening that we're planning on the northeast corner, kind of by the additional parking behind the truck court there. And we'd like to, screen that dock area as much as possible from 113th Place. And so we've added, in addition to those screen walls, we've added landscape, additional trees there on that northeast corner of the parcel there. If you could go to the next slide, please. And these are the elevations that Judy showed as well, but it also includes a picture of the building across the street. So we're proposing consistent design here This is one of the office corners, so it would be really similar to what that corner would look like right on 113th, or I'm sorry, on 112th on the south corner of the building, the southwest corner of the building. So some glass line there, going to be primarily office on that corner is what we're anticipating. And so that's why the glass is concentrated on that side of the building. We have equal amount of glass on the north side of the building facing Reedway as well. And again, that's to provide flexibility for a variety of different office placements for these tenants, potential tenants. If you could go to the next slide, please. And just one other thing I want to touch on, and this is a big focus of United Properties and of our company, and I know becoming more of a focus of residents and jurisdictions, of course, is just sustainability aspects of these buildings and what we're doing to, think about proactive ways to be greener and more sustainable in these developments. The type of construction that we're doing here is tilt-up concrete construction. So that allows for much fewer joints than other types of industrial construction types and allows for a better envelope tightness inside that building to keep kind of air from flowing out of those joints. Another thing that we're doing on many of our projects actually moving forward is providing infrastructure for electric vehicle charging stations. And this will allow, it'll provide additional conduit throughout the entire site to allow for future tenants to install charging stations at a variety of different locations on the site. We also make sure to use low water plantings and of course, LED fixtures. These buildings are cool roof, TPO cool roof, and they're really light in color as well. So we try to reduce the energy required to operate the facility by utilizing those kind of design elements. Next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation. I welcome any feedback and questions and comments. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll go to public comments. We welcome comments and questions from the public. I'll repeat the phone number, 855-695-3744. And don't forget to press *3. Looks like we're not going to have to limit public comments. I'm not seeing any, Mayor Pro Tem, I don't see any. Is there any in the queue?
No, Mayor, there's no
Okay.
one there.
And the because we've reconvened, or what's the phrase, restructured the planning and zoning in DeLark. They are now in training, and so we're not going to go to the planning and zoning members for this concept review, and we will return to them participating directly, or the Land Use Review Commission people are appointed members in May. So I'll ask if there's is there any other advisory board members that would like to comment? If so, now would be the time to raise your hand and I'll identify you. Not know anyone, that we'll go to then, we'll go to city council comments. City council, any comments, feedback for this project? Please raise your hand. Councilmember Tessier.
Thanks. I got to keep my video off. I don't have the best service, so I wanted to talk a little bit, or maybe have someone share a little bit about the proximity to the school. And I know that school will be expanding as well, and if there are concerns around traffic and students being in that area.
Can I address that?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the comment. And Jefferson Academy is a school that we've been working with since the beginning of this project and work really closely with still. So we've been in contact with Heather there, the principal, and she's aware of our application coming in, and we've been working, in conjunction with her with the other buildings as well. And there wasn't a concern about proximity. We wanted to make sure there's connectivity, right, between all the pedestrian connectivity for the students, but we want to make sure that the students are not, within those industrial areas. And I think we've done a good job of managing that with Heather, really in close conjunction with her. So one of the concerns too, or one of the comments from staff regarding the parking along the industrial area and keeping students out of there, we'll definitely make sure and coordinate with Heather continually, but we'll also be posting signs on the property, that it's private parking and try and discourage any student parking there. But these uses would be really similar to what is, or really identical to what's across the street. And there has not been an issue so far there. So
Great, thank you. I appreciate
absolutely important.
Yeah, I appreciate the reaching out to the schools as well. And of the notices that were sent 1,000 feet from the space, were any, does that include Westminster residents?
Yes, this is Judy Hammer, representing planning staff. Yes, they included Westminster residents.
Okay, and did anyone have any response or share any concerns?
We did receive one comment that was put in the public folder link for the agenda, and he was a resident in Westminster. He questioned what happened if the use from a flex building went to something that was a little more intensive with regards to industrial. So I outlined, what is currently permitted on the site per the PUD, and how this PUD amendment would require getting approval from the city council for the light industrial use.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm maybe want to hear maybe from Ms. Turner, because it is more commercial, what's the reason for going industrial in this area?
Yeah, thank you for that question too. So we've owned this particular property, and we're originally intending it to be more commercial retail. We've owned this now for, I think, 3 years, and we've since been marketing the project for retail uses. Unfortunately, just I think given the time that we're in right now regarding retail uses, it's been a little bit slower than we were expecting, and we had great success across the way with the industrial uses, and really were able to cater to tenants and keep them in the Northwest Corridor and bring them to Broomfield, really, those businesses. And so, we saw that be a need in the market, and we're still continuing to see kind of a lack of industrial space, specifically in this Northwest Corridor, which is a really attractive corridor for employers. And so we wanted to be able to activate this site sooner than we think retail would be viable here. So that's really the driver here, is to be able to provide, employment base, employers a place to either own or lease space within Broomfield. And we see that as a real demand right now in this market.
Got it. Thank you. I am a little concerned about the switching of the PUD. I'm also, I don't know if the new reconfiguration of the planning and neighborhood planning, and I forget all the acronyms for the two new planning and zoning, but will they be able to comment on this particular project for council?
Councilmember Tessier, this is Anna Bertonzetti, Planning Director. So we will be happy to share the concept reviews that have come in during May that the new land use review commissioners will not have been able to comment on during the meeting, but we will definitely involve that. And I think it would be a great training opportunity to walk through these with the new commissioners and get their feedback. And then they will also be reviewing the public hearings as this moves forward. We do have an active application on the PUD plan amendment, so it isn't a quasi-judicial process. So I will limit commenting too much on the PUD amendment itself, but will mention that even with the changes to our process, the PUD amendment must be reviewed by both the Land Use Review Commission and the City Council. So that will be coming forward separately to this body in the future, early this summer. And then if the site plan were to be processed, if it's under 7 acres, that would be a final decision by the Land Use Review Commission with a call-up provision to the City Council.
Got it. Thank you for that. Yeah, I would look forward to what they have to say and look forward for it to be a good training opportunity. We just appointed them, and there's a lot of wisdom on those groups, and would love to hear what they had to say about this. Yeah, I'm just a little hesitant with the industrial being interspersed with the other commercial or retail there. I think there's opportunities for some other things, but I understand, being the owners of the land and the need to, want to get it developed sooner than later. But I am going to be a question mark until I actually get to hear from the other commissions that need to review it. So I thank you for your time.
Councilmember Gurley.
Thank you. I'm really right in line with Councilmember Tessier, right across from the high school. I was wondering if you could tell me, would it matter? Is there any way you can change the building so the entrances are on 113th instead of right across from the high school? So for me, pre-COVID, I used to drive this way to work, and the traffic at school time, there's no way you can add traffic on Reed Way right in front of that high school with this amount of work cars as well as the trucks. And then put new drivers on top of industrial driving, and I think it's just a mix. And I know the other two buildings are there, but I do think that right in front of the high school, it's just very dangerous. I see a crisis. So can you give me a little bit more information of why the building is right there and the entrance has to be off of Reed Way versus 113th?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to address that. Thanks. So we have, I guess, really 4 access points to this building. And one thing I'll mention too is the access point on 113th. That is where the truck traffic will be. So we actually, with this existing development, there is no truck traffic west 113th place there or along Reed Way. So we have restricted, and there's signage existing that restricts our truck traffic to be all on the east side of the property to completely avoid the school there. So that is going to be consistent with what we're anticipating here and proposing here. We definitely want to keep the truck traffic, they really want to access off 113th and that lighted intersection anyways. And so that works well. And then there's also another entrance point that's just in between the 7-Eleven and the car wash there. So there's multiple different access points. I think ultimately the 2 on Reed Way are going to be auto access points, potentially, for potential employees, but there really are those 2 other access points to kind of disperse that throughout. So we've completed a traffic compliance kind of letter with the original traffic that was evaluated with the development with the school in mind, of course, as well. And so we're making sure that this complies with that. And we want to keep the truck traffic to the east of the property.
So is that written down that the truck traffic is only coming in off of 113th?
So it's on our PUD. It shows signage placement on our PUD, and I don't know that we would need to add any more, but we can discuss that.
I guess I didn't catch that in the paperwork, so I will make sure that it's there. If Judy, can you just verify for me that that's on one of these pages? Because I guess as long as, for me, I just want to make sure that it's there. I'm still a little hesitant, but I just want to make sure that staff confirms that.
Sure.
'Cause-
Oh, go ahead.
That would make me more comfortable, as long as this property and the major trucks only can use the 113th Street
Right.
entrance.
And my understanding, when we did the pre-application meeting for this concept review, we met with traffic engineering, and of course, traffic engineering reviewed this during the referral period. And there are signs that are on the road that preclude trucks from a certain weight from going onto those streets.
From going on to Reed Way in front of the school. Okay.
Right. Yeah, that was actually one of Tom Schomer's comments, is that, truck traffic is precluded from going on Reed Way.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's all the questions I had, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Law Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate this project coming forward, and I wanted to make a couple of comments on some of the specifics first. First of all, I will say that I love tilt-up construction. It's relatively quick, it's relatively easy, it's cost-effective, and I think done right, it can look really well. And I would note for the rest of my colleagues that that's what our new BCC is constructed out of. And tilt-up is a really good choice in this case. So I hope that that meets with favor from my colleagues. Question for the applicant. Do you have any idea of what your rent rates would be for this space? I have a specific reason for asking.
Sure. We would be in line with market rates here. I can't quote a specific rate at the very moment, just depending on when we start construction, and based on that updated construction pricing, that might change. But we really, as a company, pride ourselves in providing market and below market rate for companies here, and really competitive rates. So that's going to be consistently what we're hoping to do here. I think ultimately as well, this size building could be a really great user sale building. We see some tenants in this size range that really want to own their own space. And so we want to be flexible in this building to provide that as an opportunity as well.
Man, that would be a cool deal to be able to build it and sell it. I hear you on that one. Well, the reason I ask about rent rates kind of plays into a discussion that I think might be, I think it's important to have with my council colleagues concerning why you do want to go with industrial on this site. It seems to me, and you can comment if I'm wrong, it seems to me that the market has fundamentally changed over the last 12 to 16 months, and that office space is a no-go on this. I would not build or own office space for anything right now. It's a very tough market, and their pro formas have changed dramatically, which leaves a user, a builder, a developer with either retail, which is very finicky, and this is not the right spot for retail. It's just not going to work. There's not enough traffic for true retail, and this cannot be it could be a destination site, but you have to get the right type of retail, and that's going to be tough. So that leaves you pretty much with the sector of the market that's sort of an industrial warehouse flex space use. And the reason I ask about rents is that we are in danger here in probably all of the Denver metro area of pricing a lot of small businesses out of the market when it comes to industrial rates. It's hard to have essentially a large high ceiling space generate enough, a business generate enough income per cubic foot, not just per square foot, but per cubic foot, because the ceilings are high, to make a go of it in some of the rent rates that we're seeing. And as a landlord of industrial space, that makes me happy on one side and not so happy on another. So I would encourage you, as this does come to market, assuming it does, to just be very sensitive to the long-term implications of well, everybody wants to make top dollar, and I'm sure you folks do too, but it has consequences in this. But I completely understand why you want to do industrial here. It's really, or flex space. It's really the only thing that's going to fit here. Have I summarized your position correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing here too is that we have the flexibility to provide a lot of office in this space. If a tenant comes in and needs, you know, a lot of office space here, it's single story with some manufacturing or some distribution, right? There's some flexibility here too. So that's really why we like this building. Yeah.
So what sort of bay size are you, if you did own and operate and rent this out, what sort of bay size are you looking at overall? Like,
yeah. So the building is 160 feet deep. So it's 3 bays. They're each, let's see, the speed bay is 60 feet and then the 2 bays are 50 feet. And that provides a lot of efficiencies for various types of tenants that are racking right within the space. And this is a 24-foot clear building. So again, just the maximum flexibility for tenants to really have efficient space as well is the key in these buildings.
You bet. And I love the layout. I think it's a very well laid out building on a little bit of a challenging site. So I like that a lot. And I support the use. I think it's like I say, tilt up is a good construction method. It's has a lot of kind of baked in sustainable features. It's easy to heat, it's easy to cool. So I like that a lot. I guess the one thing that does worry me a little bit is the traffic around Jefferson Academy and whatnot. And that's a valid question, a very valid question. And you've already answered some questions from my fellow council members. The thought that I would have is, since it is so episodic with the kids, students, and their parents dropping them off and picking them up from the school, I wonder if it's prudent to involve Jefferson Academy in those discussions about how to mitigate traffic. Can they stagger their start times and release times? I don't know. Can they encourage carpooling, which is of course sustainable and whatnot? Just I don't think it's completely appropriate to put all the burden of mitigating all the traffic in the area on the newest player, the newest construction in the area, when we know that a certain amount of the traffic problems are caused by an existing, not caused, but certainly not helped by an existing user in the neighborhood. So that's just something to toss out. I would be interested if and when you come back to hearing how you've worked with Jefferson Academy. So overall, I like the project. I hope you move forward with it. And I hope that lots and lots and lots of startup and small businesses in Broomfield find a home here and grow like crazy and are wonderful, sustainable businesses for our future. Thank you for bringing this to Broomfield.
Councilmember Schaaf.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a quick question for staff. Well, maybe it's not a quick answer, but it's a quick question. With the ordinance coming before council at a future meeting concerning the change in PUD, if that ordinance doesn't get passed, where does that put this project and how can it move forward without the approval of that ordinance?
They wouldn't be able to enter into a light industrial use, but there are a lot of general business uses that are still permitted on that property.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to get clarification on that. And then, with regards to the industrial uses in this area, there are other industrial buildings in this area other than, what's not currently built and the 7-Eleven and the Jefferson Academy. Basically, that whole block, I guess I would put it, is industrial use. Is that correct?
There's one industrial building just immediately across the street on 113th.
Okay, but to the north, though, there are numerous industrial buildings.
Correct.
Okay, and that's what it looked like from with the video that was shown. And I also believe that the park to the north of Jefferson Parkway is called the Broomfield Industrial Parks Sports Complex. So this is definitely an area which is there's an industrial component to this area. So I don't think that it's too far out of the realm to assume that there could be an industrial building built here. And for me, I'm very interested in continuing to build this type of use in Broomfield. It does build future businesses in Broomfield from entrepreneurs, small businesses, to you look at the businesses that are in the industrial buildings just to the north of this site. Those are bigger businesses. So I want to ensure, going along with that, I want to ensure that the future tenants and uses are compatible with both the schools as well as the residents nearby. That's going to be, kind of on the shoulders of the applicant. So I'm curious from the applicant, what type of tenants do you imagine will occupy this building? And could you even provide some examples for those future tenants?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think the land use application that will be coming to you early this summer is going to be requesting the same uses as what's across the street. So we're seeing food manufacturers like, GC Imports is one of our tenants that we worked with across the street. We actually moved them out of Louisville into Broomfield here when they expanded their business. Swisslog is the healthcare company. We're seeing some healthcare and tech companies in the market as well, specifically in this Northwest corridor. So I would say really similar type tenants to that from a business perspective. It's hard to get more specific because there's just such a variety of different types of industrial uses for this space. And specifically in the Northwest market, we see a lot of R&D type users as well, that they want to stay where their employees really want to live, which is, Broomfield, Louisville, Boulder area, but they're getting pushed a lot of times out of Boulder County because of cost. And so we want to be able to capture those types of tenants and keep them, bring them to Broomfield or keep them within this corridor.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that answer. I think that, regardless of the tenant, I think that there's going to be parking concerns, especially on that west side lot near the Jefferson Academy. There's going to be needs or a need for plans for traffic monitoring and parking monitoring, as well as enforcement of that, around that site, or I should say in that site and that's for the applicant. And then also along with that, there's going to need to be, ensuring that traffic routes and traffic timing doesn't negatively impact school rush hour. I've definitely been down there during school rush hour. Those, as I think that it was Councilmember Law Evans that stated this. It's those are times and places that rush hour happens. It's not consistent throughout the day. So that's going to be on the applicant to ensure that they aren't negatively impacting that further. And that congestion, as well as just the improving the safety aspect of that corridor. I like the orientation of the building with the loading bays on the east side and the pedestrian doors on the west side. I think that's the best move. I think with the architectural interest in the look of the building, that for me is important. I think that when council approved the Ronnie's Car Wash, I wanted to ensure that this was a gateway image. I think it's a dang good looking car wash if there ever was one. So I want to continue to build, on that gateway image of this area for Broomfield. I want to build in the interest of the architecture in this area. And there's various architectures. So this could come a long way. And as the applicant pointed out with the United Properties, that they completed a previous project there at the 7-Eleven gas station on 120th near the Highway 128th interchange, which utilized some of the space on the building for some public art. And there is a great mural that was one of the first murals in Broomfield. So I would love to see more of that kind of thinking outside the box and really kind of making a statement with this building. So I look forward to seeing what you bring back.
Councilmember Lindstedt.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll be brief. I largely agree with Councilmember Law Evans. I think this is conducive use to the area, and that we need to develop and build things that reflect the market. And right now, we need more of this type of development in Broomfield for a variety of reasons. So I support it. The big question is the school. The school is kind of the odd one out in that area in terms of development. And how you mitigate those issues. So, I'm thrilled to see that you're working with the principal, and I hope that when you find a future tenant, if this moves forward, you'll continue that relationship between the tenant and the principal to ensure that there's minimal impacts to public safety and traffic. My one thought was kind of in line with Councilmember Schaaf. Especially on the side facing the school, it'd be really cool to incorporate a public art component or something, just give it a little visual interest, especially with the school and kids and parents and all of that's going on there. That would be my one suggestion. But overall, I like the project. I think this is, it's hard to find places in Broomfield where we should put things like this, and I think this is a good place. So those are my comments, Mayor. I appreciate it.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. And I also like the project. I appreciate you bringing it forward. And I do like the public art suggestion as well. I know it's hard to know what type of traffic volume since you don't know what type of tenants, but I guess I would just hope that you don't do anything too intensive that creates a lot of freight traffic, because I do think that would be detrimental to that area. But overall, I think it's good for the area, and I appreciate you working with the schools and keeping the industrial loading dock part toward the back of the building away from the school. So I don't really have any questions. I guess for staff, since this is under 7 acres, it wouldn't come back before us unless there was a call up, but because there's a PUD amendment, it would come back.
That's a great question. With the way that the applicant has proceeded with the applications, they're really two separate applications. One is moving through the process and will be going to public hearings early this summer, and that's the PUD text amendment. And so that will be processed and definitely come to City Council for a final decision. And then they still will need to make a site development plan application for this building that's up for discussion this evening. So because they are separate applications, it will require a call up if City Council wanted to have further discussion when the site plan goes through the process later this year.
Thank you, Ms. Bertonzetti.
Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Castro kind of took my question a little bit and made it sound much more intelligent. I had questions about the application as well and how that might be used for the call-up. But my only addition, I am in line with a lot of what other council members are saying tonight, and just some of the concerns. But I think I appreciated it just depends on the final tenants and the way that you guys are working with the school system. But I do like the idea of the enhanced learning possibilities or internships, and so the more continued conversations with that would be helpful, for our community to sort of coexist in that area and to have a good relationship with the neighborhood. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jezierski.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I agree with comments that I've heard from all my colleagues. I think this is a good project for this location. I think I heard earlier, and I agree that I'd love to have some kind of retail or small business restaurants in this spot, but it's really not the right location. I get that you need higher traffic counts. So I think this type of flex use or light industrial goes well here. I'm glad to hear that there's communications, as you've heard, with the school district and the school. And yeah, public art seems like a fine idea. So I would encourage that. Thank you.
I guess, I have a question and a comment. The comment is, I don't think I've ever heard the word fenestration, and I just looked it up. It's real world. So I'm glad here we're worried about that. So, because it is on 112th. I did want to ask a question about, whenever I think about light industrial, and obviously this came up in the Suncap development, I presume the PUD, and I guess this is a question for staff and maybe Anna, that the PUD itself would define what type of uses could occur. Whenever I think about industrial, I think of those little quite that shows the chemicals that are in there. And I presume that, with the school and everything, which is everybody's concern, that there would be real limits on what type of industrial uses could be used.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I think a lot of us have that same association when we hear the word industrial. It definitely, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
so yeah, it definitely will have a definition in the PUD text amendment. Will be very specific to the type of uses that we mean when we are using the term light industrial.
So with that said, so it seems to me that since the PUD will definitely come to council,
Yes.
that we'll get our chance. I mean, because what I heard more than anything else was really concerned what type of uses that would be that adjacent to the school, and and that we'll have a chance to discuss that further when the PUD amendment comes to us. And once again, which I heard was the major concern, and that's kind of my summary of. I think everybody heard it. I mean, by and large, council supports it. There's concern about what light industrial means next to a high school. The comments on art, I would take seriously if I was the applicant, and because I think that's an important component, as was brought up 2 or 3 times. Obviously, traffic is a huge issue. I've seen 112th. I don't know if it's any better nowadays or not, but good comments. So I guess I'll leave that to those are our comments and review, and I guess we'll close out the concept review and let CRL go home. So thank you for your application. We look forward to seeing it move forward.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so our next agenda item this evening is a discussion on alternative voting methods. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which staff will summarize.
The Access Live event has ended. Thank you for calling. Goodbye.
Thank you, Mayor. Todd Davidson is joining us tonight to walk us through the alternative voting methods. Much anticipated and a lot of dialogue with Councilmember Schaaf, and this is the next step. Todd.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hoffman. Mayor Pro Tem, Council, thank you for inviting me today. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. At the January 19th meeting or study session, Council requested a comparison between plurality voting, ranked choice voting, and approval voting. At the end of this, staff does request Council's direction on if Council wishes to pursue either ranked choice voting or approval voting effective for the 2023 municipal election, and if so, by ordinance or by ordinance placing a question on the ballot for 2021. Next slide, please. Ranked choice voting, again, just a quick refresh, is also known as preferential voting or single transferable vote or instant runoff voting. Ranked choice voting requires that a candidate receive a majority of the votes in the final round of voting in order to be elected to office. Approval voting is when voters are allowed to select all of the candidates of which they approve. And then the candidate with the most approvals or the most votes wins. It was asked at the last study session how many races these would apply to. And since 1979, ranked choice voting would have applied to 28 out of 126. But of those 28 races, only 9 would have actually used the ranked choice tabulation because the winner in the other 17 was selected in the first round. With approval voting, all 28 of those races with multiple candidates would have qualified for approval voting and tabulation. Next slide, please. Just to go over the legal situation, once again, at this time, there's no federal standards, certification, or guidelines for ranked choice voting or approval voting. There are no ranked choice voting tabulation systems that have been federally tested or certified. There's no special certification needed for approval voting tabulation. And best practices and standards are currently being developed in municipalities and states that are using either method. Here in Colorado, although there's no ranked choice voting tabulation, although there are ranked choice voting tabulation modules available, including from our own vendor, Dominion, None have been tested or certified, and no special certification is needed for approval voting. The Colorado Department of State has already developed Rule 26 to begin to address ranked choice voting in Colorado. And again, no special rules are needed for approval voting. Next slide. A legislative updates. The For the People Act, which is also known as HR 1 or S1, would provide funding for the United States Elections Assistance Commission to develop standards and testing guidelines and testing standards and certification of ranked choice voting tabulation systems. In Colorado, we have House Bill 1071 that would require the Department of State to promulgate minimum specifications and certify a system by 2023, to build a statistical audit system similar to our risk limiting audit system that we currently have by 2025, be able to tabulate cross jurisdiction via ranked choice voting by 2025, and it would provide tabulation system licenses to counties, but counties would need to reimburse the Department of State for the use of that software. And we'll get into the cost comparisons with House Bill 1071, and without a little bit later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So administration and cost. We've had some positive developments since our last study session in that neither method would require a separate ballot card for an alternative voting method, and neither would need to be tabulated separately. Because of software updates, we would be able to list either method, ranked choice voting or approval voting contests, alongside with plurality contests, and we wouldn't need to bifurcate the tabulation system. We would need to bifurcate the audit if we adopt ranked choice voting. And that is because our current risk limiting audit software cannot handle and cannot verify a ranked choice voting contest yet. We have a state certified tabulation system for approval voting. We would have, if 1071 passes, a state certified tabulation system for ranked choice voting as well. 3 places that we see a big difference is that ranked choice voting contests will have a very different look to the ballot, and we'll show that here in a couple of slides. It would require separate instructions because it's a more complicated way of voting, and it would provide with a much more complex cast vote record. And the cast vote record is really a spreadsheet with each ballot having a line, a row, and in each column, it states how the system interpreted the vote of that ballot. Next slide, please. Identified findings. Now we've used 2 of the national advocacy groups. We used rankedchoicevotingresources.org for the RCV information here, and we used electionscience.org for the approval voting information. So how do they compare? Well, I think that advocates of both systems, of both alternative voting systems, would agree that both systems are better than plurality. Certainly both systems, the winner usually receives a majority. It eliminates the third-party spoiler effect. Think the 2000 election with Bush v. Gore, and there was a third-party candidate who may or may not have affected the outcome of that race. It minimizes strategic voting, meaning that you don't vote for your first choice because you think they don't have a chance to win. It eliminates vote splitting. The example I used in the memo of vote splitting was from 3 Seinfeld characters, and 2 of the characters have similar platforms. And so they split the vote of the majority of the people, and a third candidate comes in and wins because of the vote splitting. Winners certainly receive a broader level of support with both methods, and unfortunately, both methods do experience exhausted votes. An exhausted vote is where a voter does not take the opportunity to fully rank their ballot. They only rank their first choice or their first and second choice. And with approval voting, it also happens. They'll approve of their first or their first 2 choices and then not approve of the remainder that they could. And exhausted vote is one of the things that allows or causes a winner not to receive a majority of the votes in the final round. Next slide, please. Results reporting. So we have election night reporting. That's 7 p.m. The results that we're all used to getting on election night. All 3 methods we will be able to report that initial set of results. We're also able to update the results as the time lapses with plurality and approval voting. Unfortunately, with ranked choice voting, there is essentially a freeze after the first round of results are reported, because we have to have all of the ballots in the system ready to run the subsequent rounds of instant runoff. So it's called instant runoff, but in Colorado, it would be the 9th day. We would have those rounds of instant runoff that would run. And again, we mentioned the complex cast vote record, and I'll show you the results reports and how they compare in just a few slides. Next slide, please. This is a good example of samples of what the ballots would look like. On the left, you see the ranked choice voting ballot, and a study was done in Denver with the Center for Civic Design, the City of Denver, and the Colorado Department of State to determine which ballot style worked best for ranked choice voting. And the example on the left would be the ballot that most seem to understand most clearly. Approval voting looks just like a current contest does, except that the header right under the contest, instead of saying vote for one, it says vote for all of which you approve, or vote for up to X number. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the results reporting that we currently use with plurality. This is from the 2020 presidential primary last March. This is the Democratic results. And you can see here, yes, in Broomfield, Bernie Sanders won, but he won with just over a third of the vote. Next slide. This is an example from the 2020 Minneapolis special election for a vacant council member seat. And you can see on the left-hand column, that would be the reporting that we would do on night 1, on election night. And then on the 9th day, we would be able to run the subsequent rounds of runoff election. And you can see here they had 3 rounds in total. And it's not unusual for the winner in a ranked choice voting contest on night 1 to be the eventual winner. In fact, it's quite common. But there are chances where you have, subsequent rounds that produce a winner that may have been second or third, depending on how many candidates you have. Next slide, please. This is the election results from last year's Fargo City Commission race. They used approval voting, and you can see it's very straightforward. Next slide. So who uses these methods? Ranked choice voting is broadly used across the United States. Maine and Alaska both use ranked choice voting, as do a number of very large and impressive cities. New York City, San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, on and on and on. Basalt, Colorado is the only jurisdiction currently using ranked choice voting for the mayoral election, and it's a hand count situation. Boulder has passed an initiative to elect their mayor by ranked choice voting, but that awaits the fate of House Bill 1071. Who formerly used ranked choice voting? Well, I had put that Denver used ranked choice voting, and they did use a form of ranked choice voting, but not the exact model that we're talking about here. They used a system called the Buckland method, which was popular in the 30s. One of our citizens corrected me this week, so I thought I should call out and say thank you for the correction. Aspen used ranked choice voting in 2009 and really had a premature automated tabulation system, so they left it. And Telluride used it for 10 years for their mayoral race, but it was a hand count, and they let their ordinance age out. In the United States, currently only Fargo and St. Louis, Missouri are using approval voting. So of course, nobody in Colorado. Next slide, please. The expected cost analysis. So the column on the left is if Broomfield needs to or chooses to enact ranked choice voting on its own without House Bill 1071. The costs that you see here are in addition to the current system that we have that would use plurality. You'll see that because of the changes in the software and system changes since the January presentation, the cost has come down dramatically. The center column is if we have optimal conditions in 2023 and House Bill 1071 passes and Boulder runs an election the same year. Why is that important? Because the tabulation system license from the Secretary of State would be invoiced based on the number of voters. So this is figured based on Broomfield's number of voters and Boulder's numbers of voters. And that would take our tabulation system down to just $14,000 for that election. Without these conditions, the tabulation system would be $70,000 annually. So you'll see at the very bottom in that column, there's two numbers, one for per election and one per non-election year. And lastly, the right-hand column is for approval voting costs. It's obviously less costly. We think that no matter what system we go to, staff is recommending that if it's different than plurality, we include voter education in that because it will be a very big difference when voters get their ballots. Next slide, please. How would it be audited? Well, we've had some really important developments here since the January presentation. Plurality and approval voting could be audited with our same software that we use. It is vetted software, and it would happen at the same time as our current audit happens. If we use ranked choice voting, there's a novel software out of Melbourne. It has been used in the United States. It was used successfully in San Francisco this year. It would require a secondary audit, and it would require an outside vendor to help us run that software. But that, at least ranked choice voting contests would be auditable, and we're excited about that development. Next slide, please. So the timeline that we have listed here is a little bit off. We think instead of April, May, that should say today. I'm sorry, yeah, today. And then June of 2021 would be when staff develops the ordinance and it's presented to council on first reading. Certainly, the latest that we can get it to council by first reading would be July 13th. And then the rest of the timeline sort of falls into place after that. Next slide, please. And this is our last slide. Again, staff is requesting guidance from council on how council would prefer to move forward via an ordinance or an ordinance placing a question on the ballot. There is a correspondence folder that was linked in the agenda, and we have received significant correspondence on this question. And also the sample ordinances were included with the memo. What questions can I answer?
So let's go to council for questions and then answers to the direction that we're asking for. So Councilmember Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor. So I want to first thank staff, and especially Mr. Davidson, for your continued engagement on this topic. We've had multiple conversations, and I appreciate your time. I also want to thank my council colleagues for their continued engagement on alternative voting methods to our current system of plurality voting. As I see it, these alternative voting methods improve our current Colorado voting systems, both mail-in ballots, as well as drop boxes, things like that we already have in place. It just takes it to the next level and ensures that we have an even better voting system in place. I also want to thank previous council members Mike Shelton and Kevin Krieger for their work on this in a previous council. While I think that approval voting does make improvements over plurality voting, I worry about the vulnerabilities of strategic voting. Ranked choice voting, or what is really instant runoff voting, further minimizes or eliminates strategic voting while also allowing more honest information to be communicated by the individual on their ballot. It says, here is how I would prefer these candidates to line up. And that is more information than what is currently being done on the plurality voting, which you only get to communicate one choice. Which means the winner of the election is more in line with the electorate, as evidenced by the election results of the city of Minneapolis, which overall it says here is the person that the majority of Minneapolis wants to support. With the state legislation and the subsequent rules that will be developed by the Secretary of State, the cost of Broomfield will be decreased. The results could be released sooner than 9 days, depending on how those rules are done, just as they are completed before 9 days in other states. And also, our system would be guided by the state as we implement this system, which is a huge thing. We're not going to go this alone. Boulder has already moved this forward. There's conversations in Denver. There's conversations in Pueblo. There's conversations in Fort Collins. Many people are starting to see this as a good alternative, ranked choice voting, that is, as a good alternative to our current plurality system. So there's a lot of movement there. So not only will we have the state support and the Secretary of State's support and guidance with this, but we'll also have those other municipalities that are going through this as well with us. For me, I am supportive of moving forward with a 2021 ballot question concerning the use of ranked choice voting. Thanks, Mayor. That's all I have.
Councilmember Lamb.
Yes, I'm glad that Councilmember Schaaf has been so enthusiastic in bringing this forward. It's been an interesting learning experience for me, and I do support it, placing the ordinance as a question on the 2021 ballot. I did have a question, I guess, that Mr. Davidson could address. So given the timetable that he presented for Broomfield, how would that intersect with what you presented as the timetable for the legislation at the state level if it were to pass? So I'm seeing that there's this legislation would put things into motion at the state level in 2023, but would any of that be of benefit to our own process when we were going to have it actually implemented for the November 23 election? Would that timing of that state legislation help us at all? Is that, hopefully that's clear.
Thank you, Councilmember Lim. Yes, that's quite clear. The legislation, House Bill 1071, would help us immensely for 2023. Their deadlines for 2023 are January for the Department of State to certify and to be able to provide the license. So that would help us, if nothing else, to have a certified system. Additionally, it would, should House Bill 1071 pass, the very minimum that it would do would be able to wipe out that fee that we would have for the off-year election. So the worst we could do is, should 1071 pass, is cut our tabulation cost in half.
Okay, that's good. I needed the month of the implementation for 2023 was missing from the state legislation list. So that's good. Then it would be already in January and that would benefit us. Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Councilmember Jezierski.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have one quick question. I think I'm in favor of this overall. I do have a question though. In your presentation, Mr. Davidson, you mentioned that Telluride and Aspen have used this procedure in the past and then they both discontinued it. So just kind of wondering why they didn't stick with it. If you have any idea what happened there.
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that, Councilmember Jezierski. Aspen had a very rough go of their first election. They had some tabulation software that may have been premature or may have been installed wrong, or they had a very rough go with their first election. And one of the candidates sued. She's become infamous in the election world. That was Marilyn Marks. And so the following year, citizens voted to go back to plurality. Now, Telluride used it for 10 years and I think had very good experience with it, except that because there was no system, there was no tabulation system that they could afford at the time, they had to hand count and that was more expensive to hand count. So they let their ordinance expire.
So it sounds like with both Aspen and Telluride, the issues were with the tabulation software, and is that accurate?
It's a little different, council member, because in Aspen, it was a problematic tabulation system. And in Telluride, it was a hand count system. I think they had great success with it in Telluride, but because of the costs around it, which would, the potential cost would change for Telluride as well, should House Bill 1071 pass.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and I think mentioning the cost, I think certainly the increased cost would be the one thing that does cause me to pause briefly. I mean, it's not a huge number when we look at our total budget as a city, but it's real dollars though. So something to certainly that we should consider. But overall, I've thought about this a lot. So I was kind of on the fence for a while, but I do think that it will encourage folks to run for city council. I think it takes away some of the concerns that, some of the reasons maybe that people haven't run in the past. So for that reason, I think this could be good for our city. It could open up, more quality candidates. So I'm inclined to support this, and I guess hopeful that whatever debacle happened in Aspen doesn't happen in Broomfields. And if we have good tabulation software, hopefully that resolves whatever issues were encountered in other areas. And I guess I would support putting it on the ballot. I would entertain us just pursuing this ourselves as well. But if the desire is to put this on the ballots this fall, I would be in favor of that. Thank you.
Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Schaaf, for putting in a lot of like blood, sweat, and tears into a lot of this. I know with some past councils and also Todd, just your investigation into all of this and really researching something that's seemingly cutting edge and like, you know, people are really wanting it. It's just sort of, you know, where the rubber hits the road, what does it actually look like? And so that's where I'm at. And I am full agreement on ranked choice voting. I just have, you know, concerns about timing and funding, and if this is something good for 2023 or 2025. I'm still kind of on the fence about that. I would support it as long as it goes to a vote of the people. I'm not in support if we just sort of make an ordinance telling people how to vote. I really want it to be the people wanting to vote a certain way. And then I like the idea of a mock vote too. I feel like that was pretty interesting. And maybe down the road, you know, maybe we can hear more. I guess actually I'll ask that question now. What would a mock vote look like exactly?
Thank you, Councilmember Hinkle. The election division runs a mock election to test all systems before each, well, once a year, we run a mock election. And I think it's all the more important should an alternative voting method be chosen in Broomfield, that we really test out the software. So we would actually have our print shop pre-mark, you know, for a normal election, we do 1,800 ballots. And we would give them the way we wanted them to be marked. And then we would test the system. And we would test the system with parties there so that they can join us in assuring that the systems are all working correctly and adequately.
Gotcha, thank you. Also, Todd, I have a question. I don't know if you have the answer to this, but it sounded like in the bill, I was reading it a little bit today, just talking about how the Secretary of State is going to be developing standards. Can you tell us a little bit about how that is the same as our system now and what you think might be looking different as far as the standard for this system, you know, top down? Because I was sort of wondering, you know, if this is sort of bottom up in the way that Aspen has been treating this, right? But I would prefer it to be top down to have that state level support. And I want to be able to be in congruence with their standards. So I'm just curious as to what that might look like.
Thank you, Councilmember Hinkle. Yes, the state contracts with a voting services lab that is certified by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. There is a lab in Boulder that the state usually uses to do its testing. The lab looks at every line of code in the software to make sure there's no inappropriate code in the software. And then they do tens of thousands of tests upon the tabulation software. And they really put it through the ringer before they certify it. Some certifications, qualifications that the state currently has for our current system would be rolled over for the ranked choice voting module. But certainly some would have to be different, and there would need to be vetting to make sure that the instant runoff function works exactly as it's purported to work. It's worth noting that the city of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the city of San Francisco both use Dominion software to tabulate ranked choice voting elections. So more than likely, the system that the Secretary of State would move to certify would be Dominion, since 62 of the 64 counties already use it.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. And then one more question. What would be the consequence if we weren't ready? So let's say we're passing this, the voters want it, and we're trying to get going. What's the consequence if we actually are not ready?
That's an excellent question, Councilmember. Depending on how the wording is is included in the ballot language. We may be able to pause that for the 2023 election. Certainly if the voters vote for it, but by some unknown reason we wouldn't be ready, council could take an action and pass an ordinance for one election. I assume, is Ms. Rogers on?
She is.
I don't have hesitation about being ready for 2023. You know, if this was 2011, I would be worried. But we have so much history, recent history of successful elections being run, that I feel very confident that either of these systems could be adopted very successfully within, the next, it would be 18 months or so.
Okay, thank you. I really look forward to investigating this a little bit more. And even like I did with marijuana, I had never been in a dispensary before. So I went in and I actually, experienced what it was like to be in a dispensary. And I feel like it would be really important to even look at the machines, figure out how exactly, that this could change. And then we can explain it and be sort of beacons of education as well. I would like to see probably in the language, I just don't, of the ballot issue is that I would like to see something where we're not kind of stuck with a hand count, right? So I don't want to be stuck with hand counting 70,000 votes if we have that many people voting, right? So I would like to just sort of be, positively cautious, I guess, but I'm excited about this idea. So thank you guys.
I'm going to go ahead and call on, and it looks like it's Ms. Gilbert wants to answer the question for the legal question since she turned her camera on. Did you want to answer the question? What would happen if we just weren't ready?
I think I need to get closer to the speaker, so I'm going off camera. But thanks, Councilmember Henkel, for that question. It would be important for us to come up with language so that we would ensure that we were ready. So legal would work with elections to make sure that that ballot language would be sufficient based on the readiness with the equipment and everything. So that's a great point, and we will have that to consider.
Great, thank you guys.
Okay. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I have one question, and then I do have my feedback here ready to go. If there are no races in Broomfield in 2023 or any future year that have more than 2 candidates, would the additional cost still apply? If it was all just 1 or 2, if it was all just 2-person races?
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. That's a 2-part answer. So if 1071 fails and Broomfield would be required to obtain our own license for the tabulation, yes, we would still have to pay the full cost. If 1071 passes, we have a lot more ability to push that license acquisition out until we know if we're going to have any contest with 3 or more candidates. And in that case, we wouldn't have to pay for the license. So yes and no.
Okay, thank you. And that doesn't change my opinion here, but that's appreciated. Okay, so I want to say that I agree with that. The alternative voting methods will encourage more candidates to run in Broomfield. And this is increasingly important as we now have increasingly more unaffiliated candidates in Broomfield than Republicans or Democrats. And with ranked choice voting, this is the method I prefer. Any candidate who is interested in running can enter the race without concerns for candidates pulling votes from another candidate who has similar viewpoints on issues. And I have seen that in the past, and individuals who would have been good candidates not running because of that fear. So that is that would be a great, that's the main reason why I believe we should go forward with this. I do favor the RCV over the approval voting, since you're able to distinguish your first choice candidate from your second choice versus on the approval voting where you're just specifying that I would be okay with either of them. So appreciate that. I also think it eliminates the strategic voting for that very reason, because you can say the one person is your favorite over the second. And I would prefer that we place this measure on the ballot so that we can allow education and voter participation in the process as we move forward, so that, well, you know, as that our constituents feel good about this choice as well. And the voter education is going to be absolutely critical in this to help residents understand why we're moving in this direction and why we would how that would benefit in these these 3+ races. So thank you. That is all I have to add.
Councilmember Law Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate staff's ongoing work on this. I think that the information presented tonight was important in helping us figure out if this is a direction that it's possible to go right now, and it sounds like that it is. I am willing to put this on the ballot. I am not willing to enact this as a council. I think that this is a huge change for our voters, and I want them to be very participatory in voting on how they want to vote in the future. So I would absolutely support putting this on the ballot. It sounds like we have a certain amount, or staff has a certain amount of work to do to craft the measure correctly. Well, not correctly, but in a solid fashion. But like I say, I won't support us putting this into action. But I sure appreciate everybody's involvement on this. It's very interesting. I do not know what I would vote on this myself personally, but I think it's absolutely worth talking to and putting the question to our constituents. So thank you.
Councilmember Tessier.
Thank you. Really great conversation happening. Yes, I support it going on the ballot. I do have a question. Are we looking at just the mayoral race, or are we looking at every city council race?
Every city council.
All races. Okay. I really don't know if it will increase the number of people who participate in campaigns or running for office. I'm not completely sold on that, but maybe there is enough research out there that shows it. I just think I think a lot of people who run have to afford to be able to run here in Broomfield. So that's that's a whole other issue. But I do like the ranked choice voting probably over the other types. So yeah, it's time. Wow, it's time for a change. I like it. Thank you.
Councilmember Lindstedt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try to be brief. Again, I guess I had one question to start. I just pulled up the bill and realized that it was sitting in waiting on appropriations in the Colorado House. Is it going to pass? Is this thing going to get funded? Does anybody have a gut feeling or any intuition?
Councilmember Lindstedt, Todd Davidson again. I think if it was going to pass, it's got some of the best sponsors it could have to get it out of appropriations. It's languished in appropriations for a number of weeks now. And, I check on it daily. But Manager Hoffman may have a better outlook on that since she's better versed.
Todd, I was just gonna echo your comment about if there were sponsors that were going to get this out of appropriations and get it through, they're on that bill. So my guess is that yes, they will find a path and make it happen.
Great. When I was working in the legislature, I saw a lot of great things sit in that exact spot and never make it out. So I just was curious as to what people thought of the chances of it. Yeah, I mean, I think when I first got elected, elected, I had a long dinner with former council member Shelton, and this was one of about 3 things that I think we agreed on in that dinner. So I just want to say thank you to Councilmember Schaaf and former Councilmember Shelton for their work on this. I support putting it on the ballot and having the voters decide. I like the ranked choice voting, and I'm hopeful that we can make the language flexible enough where we could delay it if we have to, or whatever we need to do to make sure that when or if it's instituted, it's done in a really effective way that we're ready for. And hopefully, if we have, if we vote to approve this for the ballot, we could do that after we know what happens with the legislation. So, but I think moving forward with those discussions is the right thing to do. So that's all I have, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And thank you as well to Councilmember Schaaf and Mr. Davidson for their perseverance with this. I was first introduced to ranked choice voting in 2017 and have been a fan ever since. So it's taken this long. That persistence is going to pay off, and I totally support putting this on the ballot, the RCV, for the voters to decide. My favorite thing about it is that it is said to discourage negative campaigning, because while you may not earn somebody's first choice, you definitely want to try to be their second choice. And that creates a more amicable campaign atmosphere. So I do hope that we can move forward with this. And thank you all again.
Councilmember Girdle.
All right, thank you. I'm pleased that our finances went down for this initiative. I do support the ranked choice voting option over the others and putting it on the ballot. I would like to see us consider an increase of that voter education. We have a lot of really smart people in Broomfield, but 15,000 to train the number of voters we have, I think it is going to be a very confusing change. And I just don't think that money bucket is large enough for that. So I think we should look at a little bit more money there. But thank you, Mr. Davison, for a great presentation. It was I could follow it very logistically laid out. So that's all I had. I think I covered all the bullet points. Appreciate it.
I think the feedback was pretty unanimous to move forward with the ranked choice voting as far as the ballot initiative. And, I guess I would, I don't know what it takes to, well, I mean, going back to Councilmember Lindsted's comment, we're going to know if 1071 passes before we vote on the first reading. And so at least if I think your dates were, we should know by May or June whether that passes. So anyway, thank you, Todd, for your presentation. It was helpful, and so we've got the direction. We're coming up. We have one more item. I think it's going to take more than it could take an hour. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break now, and then we'll go with our last item of the evening, which is debt policy. Let's come back at 7:48, and we'll take up debt policy at that point in time. Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I think for the record that we've, Councilmember Jezierski wasn't feeling well and he will not participate in this section. So let's go ahead and move on to the debt review. And I guess I'll make a couple preface comments that in October, I had made a specific 18A request that we analyze the current debt levels, that we look at the Windy Gap financing, which at that time was proposed to be joint financing, and that we develop a debt policy. Our RCB we did an RFP. They responded to it online as Tom Wendland from them. And we have, like I said, there's 3 tranches, an A, B, and C of their RFP. It's my understanding tonight we're going to present the first part, which is our current debt levels, and look at the levels, and then talk about Windy Gap, the attempts for financing, and that the debt policy. Jennifer, I think you said would be June. So anyway, that's the purpose of this discussion, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Hoffman and Ms. Ritchie to pick up.
Thanks very much. We continue to have internet. So while this is being displayed, Mayor, while I briefly introduce this, I'm gonna go off camera. Thanks for that introduction. It's a good segue. So moving towards a shift in thinking about build out and ensuring that our decisions are based on ongoing, building a sustainable foundation, so that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, folks understand why we made the decision, under what modeling pretense we made the decision, and there's an ongoing institutional knowledge about the why, the how, the when, and the what's next. So Tom Wendland has been instrumental in having these conversations and validating Brenda Ritchie when we have these conversations about the pay-as-you-go approach, and not having that be a component, but not the end-all be-all, as well as Council, as we walk through Financing 101 and Development 101 and URA 101, leading to some fundamental shifts that we've had with our economic vitality, turning it into a more sustainable approach. The conversation about debt is right in alignment with having a more dynamic model. And part of that is understanding and acknowledging that relying on development paying its own way is not sustainable. So again, it's a piece of the overall pie, but being heavily reliant on it is not. And so with that in mind, the entrance cost to development is the water tap fees, sewer tap fees. It's those one hits. But as we grow as a community, so these decisions that were made back in 2012, we look very different as a community than we do now with the amount that we have left to develop. So as we develop out, the reliance on one-time hits should lessen. And then those are the conversations that we will have as we move forward about the rate structure, that the ongoing water rates and sewer rates are part of the overall package that keep us healthy for updates, upgrades, operations, staffing. Again, it's a more robust package that we make data-driven decisions. And how we made financial, again, what those financial decisions are as we move forward, Brenda's going to do an overview. Tom is going to walk us through the PowerPoint that does an exceptional job of indicating and laying out for council what the Moody's rates are, where our individual funding pots are rated right now, and what the impacts and possibilities of possible future refinancing. So again, similar to the philosophy of dynamic modeling, we're not looking at this as an individual standalone. but we're looking at it incorporating a sustainable development matrix, as well as utilization from a dynamic modeling approach for our financial plan. So again, all of these pieces lead us up to really reviewing where we are, what we owe, and the timing to execute on any financing opportunities. Part of the conversation tonight, Mayor and Council, includes the recommendation to move from the long-held position and recommendation of group financing for the Windy Gap project to funding it ourselves, being reliant on ourselves, not assuming responsibility for debt repayment for others, as well as it's similar to kind of co-signing, and really being the masters of our own destiny with regards to if we want to, when we want to reevaluate and or reassess that bond amount. It's significant, as all of us know. And during the review and analysis, confirming what the mayor's understanding was that being heavily reliant on those tap fees is not a financial structure that certainly I would be comfortable recommending to council and signing off on and having my name be a part of that. So Brenda Ritchie is going to walk us through the overview for the discussion tonight. She'll introduce Tom, again, who's been instrumental in helping CCOB over the last 20 years. And it's interesting, when Brenda and I've had additional conversations with Mr. Wendelin, a lot of the direction and philosophy that from the paradigm shift that we're moving into has been something that Tom has been very aware of and recommending for a long period of time. So we want to be able to embrace those recommendations. At the end of the presentation, I'll provide a timeline with the what's next, so that council can be well informed with what you can expect and what staff is working on now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our CFO, Brenda Ritchie, for the overview. Brenda.
Thank you, City Manager Hoffman, and great comprehensive overview. Part of that, managing Broomfield's debt and the discussion for this evening, it's really important we understand the structure and complexities of the various debts that Broomfield maintains. And as Ms. Hoffman indicated, Tom Wendelin is here this evening with RBC, and he's going to walk us through that analysis of the debt specifically. And the fundamental structure is that Broomfield's debt varies based on the revenue funding streams. For example, Broomfield's debt can be categorized into three main areas, if you will. We've got general obligation, our certificate of participation, and enterprise bonds. So with our general obligation bonds, they're going to be items such as our Broomfield Community Center and Dillon Road bonds, which are primarily secured and pledged through tax revenues. While on the other hand, our certificates of participations act more like a lease purchase or a type of agreement. And those examples are construction for city and county facilities like the HHS building or detention center. And then our enterprise bonds are really related to our water and sewer specific finance project, such as the Windy Gap Fermi project that we'll talk about later this evening. It's important to keep in mind that these financing structures, are separate from one another. That's because the revenue streams are very specific to funding the debt. It's the same way in which our sewer fund can't pay for our operations of the general city and county, and why we just can't have one single debt ratio, because it's really not a one-to-one comparison. When we started this debt conversation in the fall of last year, staff provided a high-level summary of what our neighboring communities were doing in terms of debt. However, because Broomfield's unique in the fact that we're a city and county, it's not a straightforward comparison. And these types of debts and structure are really only reflective of a point in time. And the services that Broomfield offers are really different from that of our neighbors. And as we'll hear tonight from RBC, Broomfield's independent debt loads should be evaluated against how we intend to build out as a community, which is why staff has begun aligning our finances, as Ms. Hoffman indicated, that more comprehensive and dynamic modeling approach similar to our matrix development team and the long range financial plan refreshes that we just did. And now with RBC's assistance, we're able to review the data and providing the analysis related specifically to the debt load. We started with a high level approach of understanding what Broomfield currently has really to poise us for the future opportunities and evaluate what debt should look like in the future. In order for that to occur, we really have to start linking all of these plans, whether it be our long-range financial plan, and identifying those demands and the needs of our services. And one area is really taking a look, as Ms. Hoffman indicated, the utility rate models, which is similarly to the long-range financial plan. It was last updated in 2012. So staff is working to release that request for proposal for an independent analysis of those existing rates and recommended adjusted rates within the coming week. The report will help us determine if those proposed future rates do in fact support the growth identified in our plans, as well as any potential debt to fund those future projects for ongoing capital maintenance and operations. It's really important that we continue on this trajectory of sound structural financial foundation. It takes a comprehensive and dynamic approach to linking all the various models and plans together so that we can continue to be agile as things change. Now, Mr. Tom Wendelin is here of RBC. He's going to walk us through this analysis of Broomfield's debt to provide that high-level overview. As Ms. Hoffman said, he's been working with the city and county of Broomfield for over 20 years now, has a very in-depth knowledge of how our debts are structured, what our capabilities are in terms of refinancing. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Wendelin. Tom?
Thank you. As I said, I'm Tom Wendelin with RBC Capital Markets. I've been with RBC Capital Markets over 20 years, been doing this over 25 years, and really have worked on probably every project going back to probably about 99 or 2000 or something right around there for Broomfield. So I'm pretty well versed in kind of all the things that got financed over time. And so one is kind of understanding how things got financed, which bucket they got put in, what their purpose was for, and making sure that they were structured in a way that was responsible and could be repaid in a timely fashion. And, you know, Broomfield could grow with not having some excessive debt burdens kind of going forward. And as part of that, similar to a credit rating, and I think if you'll change the slide, so I think it's probably the third page there. I think it's the next one, maybe. Similar to like when people, the best analogy is people go buy cars and you have credit rating scores, and there's probably 3 people that give you a credit rating score. In the municipal market, there's about 3 entities that review and rate and understand municipal credits only. One is Moody's, the other is S&P, and the other one is Fitch. Moody's is probably the one that takes both quantitative numbers and qualitative aspects of the city into account to kind of come to an overall rating of Broomfield's debt in specific categories. And so from this slide, the top part really just kind of shows you what is the highest rated municipal debt there is, and that's AAA. There aren't that many in the country. And the few that are typically probably school districts that vote unlimited tax general obligation bonds. So that's a pretty safe investment. They have a broad tax base, and they're not relying on, you know, revenues coming in from sales tax or anything else. And then where most people fall out of highly rated municipal credits is in the highlighted one, which is AA1, AA2, AA3, and the 1 and the 2 and the 3 are just their grades in between there. So AA1 is better than AA2, and AA2 is better than AA3. And so, and all buyers of municipal bonds kind of look to these ratings and rating reports, because there's probably $8 billion on any given week of municipal bonds being offered in the market. So the one thing they have to understand is what are the credit ratings of what I'm looking at. And Broomfield has always solidly kind of been in this kind of AA category. They've moved up a little bit over time, but has stabilized there. They've never really financed anything unless it was necessary. And then obviously, as you go down this list, the A1, A2, A3, those are lower rated credits. You might find those with a charter school or something less. And the BBB, you might find those with your typical metropolitan districts. I do see some stuff, the BAA stuff that might be hotels or other things that are done, but that's pretty much the gamut of what people buy. And the biggest buyer base is really kind of in the AA category, which is where you guys lie. So in the universe of investors that are looking to invest in Broomfield, having a AA rating gives you the broadest base for people to look at and want to participate in financing projects for Broomfield. And as Brenda and Jennifer were saying, each one of these has kind of a different revenue pledge. So if you really had general obligation bonds and you were to issue those, they would be considered AA1. Broomfield really doesn't have any general obligation bonds. They never really voted any or issued any. The next category, which is certificates of participation, lease purchase obligations, which are a lot of the city and county facilities that were built that were needed when you became a county. That's slightly less because you can't just tax people. It relies on money coming in and you to operate and budget and appropriate money to pay for it. And so when they start looking at those, they also look at you, how you operate your financials, and the essentiality of the projects you're trying to finance. And so, you know, if you were trying to finance something that, you know, was way out of the mainstream, people might wonder why you were doing that. I think everything ever the Broomfield has ever done has been straight up municipal buildings that serve a municipal purpose. And so they've always been essential. AA2 is really kind of the top line that I usually see, you know, for those types of credits. The next category, which are sales tax revenue bonds, which are only backed by sales tax revenues. And once again, sales tax varies a lot. It can go up and down as the economy changes. And it depends how much of it is of your budget and things like that. But the way the rating agencies view that is a little bit less than your kind of COPs. So that's a AA3, but still that's in the AA category, and that's certainly fine. And that can improve over time if you pay off debt and revenues go up. And obviously if financial positions change, those things can come down. But these guys will evaluate this every year and kind of go through not only metrics, but also talking to staff and understanding the qualitative things about Broomfield, not just quantitative things, because people that run it matter. And then we get into the water and the sewer enterprise, which has probably been the biggest topic probably for the last 20 years, is the two revenue sources there are really recurring charges for water sewer uses by individuals and businesses and these tap fees.
Tom, do you want us to, so the slide that we're still on is indicative of the ratings? Do you want us to, yes, to move to the individual slides so that?
Yeah, if you want to move to, I think there might be the one after this. And so here, these are your certificates of participation. This was actually done way back in 2000 for the detention center, the jail, and some other facilities. It's been refinanced twice now. I think the last time we refinanced it, we saved almost $17 million for Broomfield. And probably the biggest thing to note is that it pays off in 2027. And that is usually unheard of in most municipalities. And so that can be paid off in short order. That gives you plenty of room to do other things down the road. You're not burdened by 30 years worth of debt payments. And so, but currently that's been refinanced twice. It's only has 7 years left. And so there really isn't a straightforward refinancing opportunity for it. It would just have to be if we wanted to restructure it to fit something else into there for you. And so that's the COP part of it. Like I said, we did, right now, the only thing that these secure is the rec center and the detention facility. But in the beginning, they encompassed everything. And as the principal pays down, we release the collateral behind it. So at this point, the only thing that is left is those two facilities. And then there is a release provision in here for one of them. And then at the end, you will own them all free and clear. But probably the most, like I said, the most striking thing is that it will pay off in 2027 to me. And we've refinanced it twice and saved significant amounts of savings for Broomfield and even shortened up the repayment term at one time. And then, I don't know what you have on the next slide. These are the Broomfield Urban Renewal Bonds, which went to the First Bank Center, and they're payable primarily from the tax increment revenues generated from the development in that area. Obviously, the time that they got done was 2005, which probably wasn't the best economic times. And so the project, didn't quite perform, and that's more bigger financial macro issues. But in theory, the only thing that goes towards these are tax increment revenues, and then if those were insufficient, there was an annual appropriating guarantee to make up those shortfalls. Right now, I think the TIF revenue is getting to the point where it fully covers the annual debt service. These can be restructured at any time, and even though they're pretty short, they only go out to 2030. I think it's something that it just needs to be fixed. It's been a topic for a long time. It has a bank letter of credit on it, which is what gives it the credit in the marketplace for people to own it. They can decide they want to raise your annual letter of credit fee. They can do a lot of things to you if they would like to get out of them. And the rate that's associated with it as well is the short-term rates right now. And so short-term rates are very low. So I think it's one that we should further look into as to what can we do to kind of clean this up and clean up some of the stuff on the financials and kind of get this so it's not a topic all the time, because it has been one for quite a long time. And there's probably the bigger topic of the need for the event center in general, but that's what these went towards. The idea was all the tax increment revenue that came from development should have paid for it. That just didn't quite turn out to be the case. So Broomfield does have this moral obligation every year to make up shortfalls, and they have done that, and have continued to do that. And I think it's just time to try to find a better fix for this than kind of going through those motions every year. And then on the next slide, these were the sales tax bonds. They did a lot of street improvements and various other things. These can be refinanced. They're not technically refinanceable until 2027. There are some other things we can do. You can't refinance them on a tax exempt basis before its call date, but there are things we could do that which would be, maybe it's a taxable that then converts to tax exempt and other things. But once again, this has been refinanced before, and we extracted a fair amount of savings out of it before, but it's another one to look at and see what we can refinance, what makes sense, and does it blend into other projects and other things you may be wanting to do going forward. Because debt is kind of all encompassing, and you got to kind of blend it all together to make sure it all kind of fits within your budget and what your future capital plans are and all of those things. So, and those, like I said, are rated AA3, which is, once again, a highly rated credit. So selling the bonds or finding someone to loan the money to refinance these is never really the issue. It's just finding a structure that could save you money and figuring out the timing and when to do it. And is there something else we can do with it along with it to, blend it in with some other stuff that you have on your books. And then the next slide. These were also some sales tax revenue bonds. And those kind of go back. These, once again, are fairly short. They come due in less than 10 years, but there is a portion there that in 2023 to 2027, those can be refinanced. I have received, and Brenda has received a couple of unsolicited proposals looking at some potential structures of doing that. It just requires a more thorough analysis to determine the best timing and best way to maximize the savings to the city and county of Broomfield on this. But if you did nothing else, you would pay it off in 10 years, but there is also the opportunity to save some additional money there as well. And then the next slide. This is where we kind of get into the water and sewer enterprise bonds. And on the left there, you can see your sewer bonds go out to 2031. They are refinanceable, basically in 2022. So there are a couple of things we could do there as well, and generate some significant savings is just refinancing those. And then the bigger picture is kind of over on the right is when you look at your revenue breakout, charges for services versus charges for development fees. Those things are pretty close to 50-50. And that's always been a problem for the rating agencies because TAP fees are not a consistent revenue thing. They just happen when development happens. And so that's probably the biggest of all the things that Moody's looks at. That's their biggest problem with both the water and the sewer bonds is the higher reliance on TAP fees as a revenue source. And given as much as the system is built out, you should see more revenue just coming from current services and charges and not as much dependence upon TAP fees to service debt. Right now, it certainly can service debt. It has kind of sufficient coverage to do that. There's a couple coverage boxes down there, and the debt service coverage, if I include TAP fees, it's 4 times. It's easy to make that payment. But if you take TAP fees out of that equation, as you can see, that number is less than 1 or 1. And so that's where rating agencies will focus on that number, just because of the uncertainty of TAP fees kind of going forward. And they will also look at what your capital plan is and I think also doing a rate study as well, so you can tell them kind of what your plan is moving forward, to change the revenue mix and how you're going to go about that to improve the credit. You know, whether it's refinancing, if we refinance it, the rating should stay the same. But if we were to borrow some additional money for some reason, we would want to present it in such a way that the rating didn't go down. But once again, it's hard to say that I don't know anyone else that has all their debt paying off in 10 years, which is kind of a marvel in and of itself. But I think that's just always been, Broomfield has been very conservative in borrowing and never went for really long-term bond issues. They were mostly 20 years, you know, took advantage of any place they could to save money and, you know, borrowed on a prudent basis. But these two funds, the sewer and the water fund, this has been a topic for 20 years. And you would hope that as the system matures, that more revenues are on a recurring basis from users. And to some degree, that will play into the Windy Gap project as well on the water side. But the sewer system as it sits now, it can certainly service its debt. It's got plenty, if you include tap fees. If those were significantly less, it's a little harder to make debt service. But you know, you also only got till 2031 to kind of repay all of this. So it's not like you have a huge time horizon where you have to try to solve something. These are level debt service payments, so it's not like we have to rely on increasing revenue over time. Inflation should take care of some of these things. Rate increases should. So coverage and the operation of this fund should just gradually improve over time anyway. And then I think the next slide should be then the water fund. And this one's probably a little more problematic. The only thing is that you're retiring all your debt in the water fund at the end of 22. So there really isn't anything to refinance there. If you had cash or something, we could just pay it off early. But there really isn't a refinancing option available to you there. But this one has even a little more reliance on tap fees. And when you kind of distill down to these coverage levels again towards the bottom, the one without tap fees is an actual negative number, which basically says that if I had no tap fees, I don't have enough general revenue to pay my operating expenses. And, you know, even if you were an individual, it's almost like you're relying on your annual bonuses to make sure you make all your payments. And so it has some risk to it. And most systems have moved closer to or at least trying to cover all their expenses out of recurring charges. And, you know, but this has been a topic for a long time. And I think a lot of people were just reluctant to raise, you know, either water or sewer rates over time. But eventually this has kind of caught up to a point where the credit, you know, getting a rating, especially trying to incorporate Windy Gap, is going to be somewhat of a challenge because of that factor. But, you know, Broomfield still has room to grow, and, you know, you guys will continue to collect tap fees. Is trying to find the right balance of, you know, recurring revenues going up while you build out and the tap fees are going down, and trying to find that right balance to get to a place where this fund operates and can also do its capital improvements down the road and things like that. Because you also need to provide additional cash kind of for that going forward. And then just generally speaking of kind of what kind of cash should you have on hand in these funds, you know, kind of a general rule is you'd like to at least have 1 or 2 years worth of operating and debt service expenses, and then try to incorporate your capital plan as well. if you have some things coming up in the next 3 or 5 years, you want to try to incorporate that in determining how we let the fund balance grow and how we spend it down. So there isn't really one number to say we should always have a fund balance of something. I think it's a dynamic number that has to be looked at in conjunction with your capital improvement plan and other things that are going on in the system, just general maintenance and other things that you might have to spend some additional money on. But cash is also a big thing for rating agencies. You want to have cash because if something happened, that is a fallback to be able to pay expenses. But you don't like to see that number going down. You would prefer to see it kind of building up over time. And the only time it really should kind of go down is if you're expending it on capital projects. But as I said, these two funds have just kind of been an issue for 20 years. And when you first started out, it made perfect sense because you don't have any people. And so you rely on tap fees, but the balance at some point has to kind of change. So. And then I don't know if anyone had any questions on this one or. And then
Tom, do you, okay. I was just, yeah, so we're coming close to, from the revenue bonds. Tom, do you want to talk specifically briefly about Windy Gap, and then we'll go back into council questions and conversations. Mayor, does that work?
Yeah, no, I'd prefer him to present Windy Gap, and then we'll go to council.
No, that's fine. And you guys asked me to look at Windy Gap. The whole thing is defined in an allotment agreement. And there's several entities that were willing to participate in that. There are some provisions that, first of all, you guys want to pay your debt over 20 years. They're not really going to let you do that. They're going to let you only pay 90% of it in 20 years and another 10% in 20 to 30 years. And the gist of that is to kind of keep you on the hook for if someone else does not make their annual payments, there are these step-up provisions for others to make their payments. And so you would get storage rights or other things. It gets kind of messy in there, but Windy Gap is a big project and you guys are a big portion of it. And it's always hard for people to work together in a general sense, and especially if there's some issue where someone doesn't pay. I personally would like to be in charge of my own destiny. I would like to structure the debt that works best for what Broomfield's going to build out at. I don't want to be dictated by this is what you're going to do, and I certainly wouldn't want to be told that, I'm also on the hook for a bunch of other people, even though I'm sure they'll probably pay. It is a contingent liability that somehow is going to get reflected on your financials, and it will be there for 30 years. And so it's kind of trying to figure out, can Broomfield borrow on its own, which Longmont is one of them that is borrowing on their own, and does it make sense? And is that the better option as opposed to, going along with this pooled financing? Unfortunately, they're kind of behind on a lot of the documents and stuff on the pooled financing. So haven't got all the detailed information I would probably like. And there's a lot of legal stuff in the allotment agreement that I think should get reviewed. To understand your rights and obligations and other things under that agreement. I just don't think it's gotten vetted by a lot of people. I think it kind of got out there and a lot of people never really had the opportunity to really dig into it and what are some of the legal implications for us going forward. And so I did look at the financing costs, as long as you stated a AA3, the pool deal would be a AA3. There really isn't a huge interest rate benefit for being in the pool. I think the only problem is once we move and try to finance, and I think this would affect the pool deal as well, but moving this $150 million into the water fund just based upon how much comes from tap fees, I have a feeling that the rating will come down from a AA3. That will mean slightly higher interest rates. So it would require a little more comparison as to, can the pooled financing keep a higher rating? Does that lower interest rate offset some of these other concerns you have? And trying to find the right balance of how to approach it. So my first thing I would like to do is just really have a conversation with Moody's, because they do review your credit every year and they know the water fund, and get a better feel for how they think what implications this would have for your water fund and your rating. And so you could be armed with more information and understand the implications of doing it on your own, as opposed to doing it through the pool deal. Like I said, the pool deal it's just not very well defined as far as, rates and other things. It's a lot of assumptions. And I think the biggest assumption is that everyone stays at their current rating. And I think the thing they miss is that Broomfield's rating has the possibility to go down, which would affect the pooled rating. And the benefit of the pooled rating may not be as good as these other people think, and it may be in their best interest to go finance on their own as well. But it is a big piece of debt, and I know, Pat, you and I have talked about it. It's a big obligation to take on, and trying to figure out how to set it up and finance it the best way possible is paramount. And comparing these two options, and getting in bed with other people, while people usually play nice, sometimes they don't, and sometimes you may want to refinance this or restructure down the road, and you're dictated by what other people say, and you can't do that. And so you lose a lot of flexibility that you would have by doing it on your own. So, I mean, I think if all things were equal, I would do it on your own. I think it just gives you more opportunity, more flexibility, more control over your own destiny. I think it's just trying to differentiate between how much does this impact your rating, and even what it might even do to the pool rating deal, and just trying to figure out what are the two best options, cost wise. And then there's always these political issues that you have to wrestle with too, as to whether, do I want to hang out with these people for 30 years and trust that everyone plays nice? Because everyone plays nice until something goes wrong, and when it goes wrong, then it's a very complicated agreement, and I think there's a lot of things in there that could get very complicated to sort out if for some reason someone didn't pay. So. And then Jennifer, I didn't know if there was more that you wanted me to kind of cover on this, or.
No, Tom, thank you. Thank you very much. Back over to the mayor, and then again, as we close this conversation after the Q&A, I will move through the timelines of the next 4 events that we have in the queue for execution right now.
Yeah, Jennifer, since we have had some conversations this, and I've been involved in this discussion for the last year, I did want to highlight before we go to questions, and comments. There were basically 3 things that came out of, our existing debt, is in good shape. I mean, Tom's impressed with the 10-year payoff, but we do have some issues with the borough debt, which is something that came up, when I was mayor before, and that, and that I guess I would point out that we're using funds outside that TIF district to pay down that debt, and it's something that staff is looking to want to take a look at, and Tom is as well. Number two, which I think is very significant to make a comment on, and I just want people to be aware of this, is that that we had talked a year ago, we talked about joint financing. That's where we were headed. Tom's recommending that, that we not do joint financing, which is something I concur with. And the third one, and that's something he hasn't mentioned yet, he's alluded to several times, Jennifer, that you and I have talked about directly, and Brenda, is that we probably ought to do a rate study. And I guess I just want to get that out there before council, a water rate study, looking at water rates and ways to move away from tap fees being so significant in our water funds and sewer funds.
So
yeah,
Tom, just real quick,
I think the last rate study we did was like 2012, if I remember right.
Yeah, it was when I was mayor before, yes.
And it did call for rate increases, and I think that those just never got implemented to the degree that they were supposed to. I think it, and that was a staff decision, and I don't,
It's a council decision.
Well, then that too, yes. But I get it, but it was done back then, and but yes, I think a rate study. No matter what, you're going to have a rate study, because we got to kind of figure out what it takes to get the system to operate not only now but going forward in the future, so we don't have some issues that come up to where we're going to have some shortfalls because we just relied too much on tap fees. So yes, I think that's and Moody's and other people will like to see a rate study too. So
okay, thank you.
So that'll be part of the conversation after the Q&A. We have an RFP already prepared for that rate study, so that has been in the works. And frankly, council can't make a decision on items that staff doesn't bring to the table. So on that other rate study increase, that's part of the transparency and sustainable piece, regardless of who your city manager is and who your staff at the table is. That's the ongoing dialogue that we're having. So again, after we get finished with the Q&A, Mayor and Council, I'll walk through the timeline on the next 4 items that we'll be talking about starting in June, which includes the rate study review.
Thank you. So Councilmember Law Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I very much appreciate this discussion. And I remember the last time we had a kind of an overview of the debt when Charles was still city manager. And okay, I'll just go into my questions if I can get my clipboard here to work. I appreciate, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate your summary. And that was what I heard as well. With regards to our existing debt, that we're in good shape and we've done things conservatively, I guess I have a little bit of a hard time listening to an awful lot of discussion about about moving away from a very conservative position in terms of our financing. And this is not probably the time to discuss that. Well, maybe it is, I don't know, but I'm going to have a hard time moving away from that, just because I think that there are unknowns out there with regards to how we will ultimately recover from COVID. And then these new demographic shifts the ongoing demographic shifts as we mature and whatnot. And I like everyone's analysis and I pretty much buy into it, but by nature, I'm fiscally really conservative. Mr. Mayor, you and I have had this discussion multiple times before. And so I want to be very, very careful as we go through and consider taking on more debt. It was a really big deal for past councils to take on the debt that we did take on to do 144th and the new BCC. And that's what the last time we really had on council a really big debt discussion. And those have both, to date, been very, very successful. So that's just a general comment. With regard to the borough debt, there's the elephant in the room here, and the elephant in the room needs to get sold or otherwise gotten rid of, because the elephant in the room, which is the First Bank Center, is has never been more of an elephant in the room, has never been more of a dead weight around our necks than it has been the last year. And I guess this isn't a debt question, but I would like to have staff at least spend a little bit of time looking into whether or not it's possible to get rid of it, to sell it. Or I don't know if we can sell it for what we owe it, but is there a way to make a deal on that thing? Because that is just, I hate to say it, but it was a boondoggle at the beginning, and it's just as much of a boondoggle now, if not more. So that's my, am I right in thinking? And I don't know who needs to, yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Councilmember Lyons, so I don't smile for any other reason than, so Brenda and I have been communicating with David Ehrlich as recently, so the contract is up in September. So a couple of different things. I used the word albatross, and so that's kind of the basis of the follow-up conversations that we have happening right now with David Ehrlich and Kroenke Sports and AEG. So we've had very frank conversations. They were grateful, in fact, when Brenda and I were on the phone about really laying out what those finances were. They indicated that they had never heard that before. They hadn't had the whole package for us to be able to say, the taking from Peter to pay Paul. This is the first year that Arista has generated enough tax increment revenue to pay, so that we didn't have to take from 120th from Wadsworth URA. That said, the agreement that we've had in place, aside from COVID, we've had a few different conversations, Councilmember Lyons, about the viability of what that looks like there. So everything from what would it cost to scrape, having an appraisal of what it would cost to repurpose. All indications are initially cost prohibitive, unless what would go there would be short-term benefit, medium-term benefit, long-term benefit. We've had some conversations with the hospital. We've had some conversations with CU. So again, from a multi-use, we'll have additional conversations on that, particularly when we come back to council, with that being one of the primary conversations. At this point, given the contract expires in September, the conversations thus far with AEG is a contract extension with a shared risk on any CapEx that needs to be done, given that it's been sitting vacant. It costs us about $25,000 a month to keep the water running and plumbing and lights and heat to the extent to where we can use it again. So again, it's another one of those conversations between Brenda and the mayor and I that ripping that Band-Aid off, I don't want my name attached to a lot of these ongoing projects, to be really frank with you, and I want to be mindful. So that is absolutely a priority for us.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And I appreciate that you don't want your name on a dirty Band-Aid, as it were. But something has to be done. It's clearly, it was never really viable in the beginning, and it's clearly not viable now. So I appreciate that, and I really look forward to having that discussion further on. So which brings me to...
Sadly, I remember all of this, and there was a period of time where people did smaller sporting events that, to compete against the Pepsi Center and the NBA and stuff like that. But trust me, it's one of those things I look at every time and shake my head, because it's...
Don't we all? The best thing that came out of it maybe was the roller derby. I don't know.
Yeah, and you know, at one time Charles asked me if I could sell the building, and all I said is no one will buy that building because they can just manage it. You know, whether it's Cronky or whatever, there's no real value in buying that building. And so it's trying to figure out, is there a better use for it, you know, and what it is. But, and I don't think that that's really just an amenity that Broomfield really is passionate about or wants, to be honest with you. So I don't, you know, it doesn't really, it's not a big enough size to attract a lot of things. And there has to be better use for the land underneath it, I would think. But
well, it certainly is in a prime spot.
Yes, it is. But I've dreamed about it for many years.
Well, I would like to put something, keep that conversation going. But I want to ask one question about Windy Gap. When I read through the staff memo and the presentation, I can see a certain amount of value toward the pooling, debt pooling. And this is these are the circumstances under which I could see that value. And I guess I'm going to phrase this as a question. It seems to me that the most vulnerable time for Broomfield is after we're on the hook for funding it via any mechanism. And as it's being constructed, what happens or what are the legal scenarios possible for, let's say we get the thing half built and some other entity in the project says, can't do it, not going to do it, you know, they have a change of heart or whatever, and they back out. Is there advantage at that point to being in the pooled funding so that we can at least get the thing built and have the use of it rather than having, you know, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, I don't want to use the pun, down the drain, but you see where I'm going with that thought.
Yeah, so I mean, you have water storage that you could, you know, if you don't need it, I'm sure that there are other people that, I haven't read the agreement as to how much you can sell or what you can do with it, but yes, you have benefit there, and you know, it would be a long-term asset, yes.
But Tom, what if we get halfway through construction, before it's finished and before there's anything stored in it other than, I don't even know, nothing in it?
David.
What? Right. Yeah. Okay. Who's staff? Is that Jen?
Yeah, David Allen is going to field this one.
Okay.
Thank you. Good. Good evening, Mayor, City Council, David Allen. Councilmember Law Evans, that's actually one of the risks of the pool financing, is that if an entity backs out, then the remaining partners have to take on that obligation. And so, for example, I'll just use Greeley as an example. They're looking at funding about $60 million into the project. And so if they were to back out under construction, we are about 1/3 of the project. And so then our liability would be an additional $20 million to fund for the completion of the project.
So David, I understand that. I agree that that's a liability. I guess what I'm worried about, and that under the pooled financing, if we get halfway through construction and someone backs out, it would be tough, but everybody else has to step up and take on the additional funding under the funding within the funding pool. We still get it built. We have a bigger share of it. Nobody likes that scenario, but at least we're protected. If we go our own separate way with the separate funding, with the separate bonds or whatever separate funding mechanism we wind up with, and we get halfway through construction and somebody else who has either separate or pooled funding, they pull out, then we're just sitting there with our own separate little funding. And unless everyone else or someone else steps up, which could be us, but it could be somebody else, all of a sudden our separate funding is at risk, or all that money. And I guess I'm wondering, is there value in the pooled funding under those circumstances, just for, you know, what I always learned to call the construction loan? And I don't think we convert to a permanent financing after the construction financing, but that's the time period that I think developers worry about, and that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, and if you read the document, you're on the hook for, irregardless of people drop out or whatever, cost overruns so let's say it turned out to be 700 million as opposed to 6. You're on the hook for your proportional share of that. So even if you finance it on your own, you would have to come up with that additional money somewhere else too.
So there's no, from that standpoint, there's no additional protection if we do the pooled funding.
Yeah, the only thing you're doing there is you're just bringing the money to the table. I think it still deserves more study, and especially as the borrowing for some of these people is a significant amount. It's a significant amount for you. What does it mean to your borrowing costs and your rating and your ability to service that debt? And but the pool program, you're on the hook for everything. You're on the hook for stuff down the road and reserves.
The time's up, Council. I think it's safe to say that that's a great question.
Okay.
It is, and we'll include that. Yeah. We'll include that as we follow up from the legal perspective. So again, on that timeline that we'll talk about after this, part of it is reaching out to Moody's to really understand what the rate is, circling back with the Northern Water Group to ascertain, if we go our own way, what the individual financing looks like. It's not reliant on us. So that was our first conversation, is if we decide not to participate, does that kill the project? So a lot of the unanswered questions, we'll circle back with council when we have this additional conversation and dig a little bit deeper.
Fair enough. Thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councilmember Gurley.
Thanks. I just had a few questions here. I was trying to read some of the charts. I thought we would go through the tables. So I was trying to refresh my memory as you guys were talking. You made a comment, Mr. Wendelin, when we were going through the water and sewer metrics, that we would tie those metrics when we talked about Windy Gap into the Windy Gap analysis, and we didn't go over that. Did you have a point to make there when we were talking about the CAP fees versus the sewer fees, or the service fees versus the tap fees, and that metric? And you said that
I think when you lay in, let's say nothing changed, the revenue mix stayed the way it is now. Adding on that amount of debt, the ratio of just recurring revenues to total debt service and expenses is a number that is actually negative, which really means that if we had no tap fees, we couldn't pay for all operations and debt service. And so that's kind of that's a red flag for rating agencies and buyers of bonds. And so it's, as you kind of look down, it's whatever it is, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up there. There's 2 little boxes there.
Yep.
Ideally, you would like that number, debt service coverage without tap fees. In a perfect world, you would like it to be 1. Broomfield had historically operated at like about a 0.6%. This is like a negative number. And when you add Windy Gap, it becomes an even bigger negative number. So it just puts a lot more stress on the system.
And when you're saying when we add Windy Gap, if we take on the debt ourselves, and I guess that would be my.
I think it's either way. It's either way because the way the Windy Gap agreement is written, it becomes an operating expense of yours. And so it actually moves ahead of your current debt service in priority of payment, which is a legal problem anyway, but that can be overcome. But it will become a line item in your expenses. So,
And I guess that's my question, to understand, and I think we kind of briefly touched on this several weeks back. if we went the route with the Windy Gap project, that would not be carried as debt on our books.
I believe it will be. You can call it an operating expense, but I think from a general accounting standpoint, you've borrowed money.
Okay.
I think your accounting firm or any else would look at that and say, Broomfield participated and is on the hook for 100 and whatever it is, $50 million. And then I think the other thing is that they would note that you also have some potential contingent liability for other participants, because that's an unknown whether someone pays and you have to make up for them. But I think no matter what, it becomes debt on your books. Now, how it's displayed in financials is slightly different maybe, but calling it an operating expense when it's debt, that's a little sleight of hand, if anything.
No,
so
yep, I was just following up because we kind of talked about that, not with you, but I thought I had understood that there was a difference on our books between Windy Gap and our own individual debt. So thank you for clearing that up. And then my next question is as we move forward with the debt on our books, whichever way we go, you had mentioned that we would be classified differently. So that would be different rate structure for us or different borrowing rates for us in the future. Is there any other penalties or that would come our way? I'm thinking of my own personal debt as I borrow and my rates go up. Is there anything else that the city would be penalized for the next 15, 20 years other than higher rates? We couldn't borrow.
Some people may say, look, you guys are so far out there that additional debt needs my approval. It would be a covenant of something like that. I don't think that would be the case, but it's not much different than you or I and our credit rating and borrowing money. Our ability to pay it, the harder it gets, the interest costs go up and the more things people want from you.
Sure.
And so I can't say for certain, but I would think that someone wouldn't just say you could go issue a bunch of debt in the future. They would want more solid metrics as to when you could do that. So it may limit doing some project down the road that you would like to do that maybe you can't do because of it. So
because of it. And then my last question was kind of in line with Councilman Evans is in that remaining liability on the debt where we might have to assume a party that had pulled out. What is the benefits to us? So for instance, if we going with Mr. Allen's example, if we assume, I think he used Greeley and there's 60,000 and we come up with the other 20 million, are we just coming up with their debt or do we get their storage capacity?
You get their storage capacity too.
Oh, okay.
But there's cure periods in there. You get what they gave up. There is a penalty for them for not paying it, and it is somewhat substantial that they'll lose those, but they do have cure periods to try to fix it. But if you're making those payments, you would get your proportional share of their storage rights.
David, you want to add anything?
Yes, that's correct. And so there's a cure period, there's a default period and then cure period. And then after that, again, if the remaining partners pick up the balance of that outstanding debt, then there's a reallocation of the share of the asset, which would be basically additional storage that would be allocated based on a proportional basis.
But we wouldn't have the water shares to use that capacity, right? Because the water shares wouldn't come with it.
No, the water shares do not come with it. It's really storage in the reservoir.
But we wouldn't have water shares to use it, right?
Well, if it was an extremely high runoff year, we could potentially use it. I think that probably the greater value would be to potentially market it to other Windy Gap participants who may be looking for additional storage.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That's all I had for right now. Thank you. I appreciate it, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Schaaf.
Thank you, Mayor. Wow, this is, thank you for this information from Mr. Wendland and as well as staff. This is the first time I've seen this level of detail on the debt and spending for Broomfield from what basically 1999 to 2017. But you know, for all of that debt that was approved, those projects really moved Broomfield forward, each of those in their own right. And so, you know, this information provides us, you know, the hindsight on those decisions, but also allows us an even better informed decisions moving forward. So I really do appreciate this information. It's really important to have. Going into my questions, you know, the first one is maybe kind of a funny one, but it's also kind of a personal one. Councilmember Laves and I have talked a little bit about this one. But regarding the moral obligation for the First Bank Center, is there any time a moral obligation is a useful tool for Broomfield to utilize in the future? You know, just kind of as a policy, like intro to policy on that debt.
Yes, it's used.
Hey, Tom, let me take this. Let me take this one just from the perspective. So two separate conversations. Councilmember Schaaf, and I'm freezing up here, so I'm going to turn my camera off. Two examples, I guess, is the best way to put it. So the moral obligation that was utilized at the First Bank Center is legally binding. It was done at the 11th hour, and it was well, regardless. It was done at the 11th hour, and it was legally binding, which is one of the reasons that we are where we are right now. So living and learning from that, it's phrased, and the mayor and I have had a lot of conversation with this, with McWhinney, with the Butterfly Pavilion, and past conversations that we've had up in Baseline. So the moral obligation that we have committed to, I'm gonna have Brenda kind of lay out what that conversation was from a legally binding perspective. Is we are going to do our best to include it in the budget and bring that to council. So the upfront moral obligation that we had at the First Bank Center is different in the ongoing from the conversations that we've had from moral obligations. Councilmember Schaaf, too, before Brenda discusses this, this was one of the final deciding when staff had moved hard on Gaylord. We had negotiated with Gaylord. We had negotiated with the Western Stock Show, with the CSU, with the extension. We had found a spot, and it came down to them saying Aurora is willing to do a moral obligation, and we were not. So your question is timely, and so relevant on the application of what that moral obligation looks like. So Brenda, will you walk us through a little bit on the for the Butterfly Pavilion, where we are with the commitment on that, and how this is in addition to for the STEM school and the Butterfly Pavilion?
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer, and thank you, Councilmember Schaaf, for the question. So in terms of our obligations, we committed a certain amount of funding in order to support both the STEM school and the Butterfly Pavilion that we've programmed annually into our CIP plan. In terms of the moral obligation, that's also subject to the annual appropriations, as City Manager Hoffman indicated. So part of our obligation is just to ensure that in the event that part of our annual budget, it includes that proportion of what may come should there be a failure of payment. So similarly, that we could be able to subsequently provide in support for those types of opportunities. And so what we do is what you'll see in the CIP look ahead, we program that in annually and for those future obligations. So that's where it comes into play, where it's subject to those annual appropriations. And what we do is include that, and it's by direction of the city manager has the authority to put that in or pull that out. And what we've done and what we provide during those study sessions, if you will, when we look at the budget, it's programmed in there in those future years in order to satisfy those obligations. So we program that in as part of our ongoing debt, and whether or not we use that would then just rolls back up into fund balance when it hasn't been used. And to date, obviously it hasn't been used, but in the terms of the First Bank Center, we have relied on that moral obligation and have subjected ourselves to providing those funds for it.
And as a general tool, it is a tool available to you for potentially something in the future, but it should be something that is very important to you, that's essential to what you do, and it gets you over the hump. Maybe it gets you a lower interest rate or something, but you got to be very judicious in using it, and it has to be very specific and for something that you really need. And the First Bank Center wouldn't have got done without that. So, that was just a requirement in order to even get that done. But it is used by other governments to shore up a few places where maybe the revenues aren't quite online or whatever. But it is a tool in your toolbox, but I would just say that I would use it as a last resort of trying to solve a problem.
Perfect. Thank you. I mean, that was my intro question. So I hope that the other questions aren't as not complicated, but just I hope they're not as convoluted questions from my standpoint. So with that conversation around the First Bank Center, I'm definitely interested in the conversations moving forward. What the possible viability of this asset is. I think that this is a big thing for Broomfield. Both as a positive asset as well as a potential negative impact. So I think that is a great conversation to be having, and it sounds like that with the contract, dates coming up, that's going to be a more pertinent conversation. So moving on, this is more of a question.
Councilmember Schaaf, I'm sorry, can I just really quickly on that?
Of course.
Cronky Sports is super excited about what this rebound is going to look like because all of this pent up demand for an intimate setting. So I wanted to put that out there, that these conversations include a year-long extension to really figure out what it is that we're doing. So their programming is contingent upon, again, that extension. But I didn't want to enter into any conversations regarding an extension until we had that CapEx conversation, that generating any additional funds in order to make that happen. So I wanted to put that out there just in case anybody from AEG is listening.
Well, thank you for that. I know that there's a lot of interest in seeing what the future of the entertainment industry as a whole looks like moving forward. So I think that plays in there just as well. So question, I think, for staff. So I'm confused by the 2022 refinance option on the 2012 bonds for the sewer and wastewater reclamation revenue bonds between the exempt, I believe the terms were exempt, and then the taxable bonds. And could you clarify why we would use one option over the other?
Did you want me to take that, or?
Go ahead, Tom, and then Brenda can also add. Or Brenda, do you want to start that one and Tom can finish?
That's okay. Tom, if you want to go ahead and take it.
In 1986, we passed, federal government has never really had a fund affinity for tax exempt bonds. And so in 86, what they said was you could refinance your tax exempt debt twice in advance of its call date and that had to be more than 90 days. If it's within 90 days, you can do as many of those as you want. And so we're not within those 90 days, and the 2017 Tax Act that was passed got rid of all advance refundings for tax exempt bonds. So you have to wait till 90 days within the call date to refinance it on a tax exempt basis. But you could do them on a taxable basis because you're not bound by any of the federal tax laws. And rates are awful low. And that has been the avenue for the last 2 or 3 years for people refinancing debt in advance of that call date, because the federal government got rid of the ability to do advanced tax exempt refundings. It was costly to municipalities, and so it may be that if we see rates going up and all those kinds of things, it might be advantageous to do it on a taxable basis as opposed to wait until 2022. But it requires some analysis, and you have to kind of look at it like, if I do it today, this is what it is. If I wait 6 months and rates move up this, what is the answer? And to understand the dynamics of either doing it now or waiting. But no longer can you do advanced refinancings on a tax exempt basis, which was the staple of most municipalities for a very long time, to take advantage of lower interest rates. So.
Thanks for that answer. I appreciate the conversation regarding the tap fees versus the fees for charges for services. So I'm pretty clear there. I look forward to that RFP coming forward and those conversations. I think that's going to be a crucial conversation for our community. We've had our municipality to the south of us, Westminster, where this was a major conversation for them this last year. So I think that the sooner that we can have this conversation, as opposed to waiting too long and getting in way over our heads, we end up in a situation like Westminster, and I definitely want to avoid that. So having that conversation sooner, I think, is good. I'm looking at my time. I think I still have some time left. Mr. Mayor, cut me off when I'm done. For future borrowing, Mr. Wetterland made a comment about further debt needs my approval. And I believe that, right now we have staff approval, council approval. Is there any other approval currently being sought? And is really the only other approval would be a vote of the Broomfield citizens for that debt?
The only thing that would sales tax bonds you can issue without a vote of the people. And that was put in place when you guys became a city and county. So that's one tool that you can always issue that no one else can. Everyone else mostly has to vote their debt. If you were ever to issue GO bonds, that would require a vote. The certificates of participation, annual lease payment stuff, you can do those because technically they're not considered debt under state law and the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. But no, if it's something the council wanted to do and staff wanted to do, and it doesn't require a vote, if it was sales tax, COPs, if it was out of an enterprise like water or sewer, you could do those, as normal course. If you wanted to do some GO bonds for some reason, that would require a vote.
Okay, I appreciate that. Just looking at the Windy Gap specifically, the debt issuance comparison between Broomfield issuance and Northern Water issuance, it looks like that there's, with the Broomfield issuance, there's a debt level that can be modified. Can the Northern Water debt level be modified as well, or is that going to be that kind of tiered? Well, I shouldn't say tiered, but that kind of high. Maybe it's a declining curve of.
No, there is no changing it. If you wanted to do something different, you can't. It's going to be, other than interest only for like 3 years, it's going to be a level debt payment to where you pay off 90% of the principal in 20 years, and then the remaining 10% gets paid off over the remaining 10 years out to 30 years.
Okay,
but there
perfect.
is no, you don't get any choice in the matter.
All right, so a quick follow-up with 20 seconds left. Would the term of the debt be extended for the Broomfield? Would the term for the debt be extended with the Broomfield issuance? Could that be extended, or is that going to be that same term that's listed there on that chart?
No, you could, I did 20 because you guys have always kind of done 20, but that can certainly be 30 years. It could be 25 years. It could be really whatever you wanted it to be. Statutorily, you can go out to 40 years. So I don't know. There aren't a lot of people that go out 40 years, but some people do.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Lim?
My first question, I'll follow up with Councilmember Schaaf's alluding to the community interest in the rate study. So I understand that Mr. Wendelin said that this rate study needs to take place and there needs to be a better balance in TAP versus recurring revenue, regardless of whether we do the group or the individual financing. What I think I would eventually like to know, and this is just throwing this out there, I'm not saying you're going to have an answer now, is does it make a difference to the rate increases for the community, whether we do the individual financing or the group financing? So that, I'm just going to throw that out there. I don't expect you to have that answer right now, not unless somebody does.
If all ratings stayed the same and the borrowing cost was the same, whether you did it or you didn't full, that wouldn't change the rate increases.
So Councilmember Lim, that was one of the conversations that we had regarding what the order of decision making. So having the rate study first, when the raters look at what the diversification of the funds are, would that impact not only the rate, but how they would view us, whether it's the 20 years or 30 years. So again, if we didn't do that, is it enough to say we're going in that direction before we issue the debt based on the dollars that we have in there now? Or do the municipal bond buyers only care about the bottom line, which is we pay the mortgage? So do they care that we may not be employed in a year when we buy the house, but we can pay right now? Or do they want that long-term guarantee that this is something that's going to be sustainable, and diversification means sustainable? But Tom's feedback was they look at what we have right now from a repayment portfolio perspective. Good question, though.
Okay.
Is that you plan to implement, as far as rate increases and stuff that change that mix. I think the problem was in 2012, they were under the belief that rates and charges were going to go up, and I just don't. They didn't to the extent I think it was discussed with them, but the more they'll take into account that's one thing about Moody's is it's just not quantitative. It's not plugging in a bunch of numbers and comparing them. They'll take the qualitative aspect of you as well as that us as a community have decided to move towards this, and we're committed to raising rates and based upon our rate study or whatever we're going to do, and they give credit for that to some degree.
Okay, thanks. My next question is, does the issuance of this either individual or group debt depend on the outcome of the appeal by the environmental group for Windy Gap? Is there any dependence on that whatsoever? Or are they going ahead issuing the debt not knowing the outcome of that case?
Councilmember Lim, I'll jump in this. this one, Tom. It's been the participants' approach not to issue debt until we have a final ruling on the appeal. Now, there have been some conversations regarding that, but again, the participants want to be conservative and don't want to issue the debt and then have a unfavorable court ruling.
Okay, so we don't really know when this debt will be issued because we don't have any control over the court ruling. Is that correct?
That is correct, but in terms of a report to City Council, I think we reported earlier this year that if the full length of the appeal or the typical appeal timeline were to go through, we would probably be looking at a year delay or so, plus or minus several months. However, there have been talks of potential settlement on the case, and so if that occurs, then certainly the decision to move forward with any kind of financing, whether that's independent or group, would come much sooner.
Okay, thanks. This is back to the general sales tax revenue bonds. Okay, in our, as those are dependent on sales tax revenue, so like it says, the sources of repayment, 1/3 of the 3.5 sales and use tax is pledged to repayment. So what impact do the TIFs that we're agreeing to that are large scale TIFs? So we just agreed to baseline, and we're going to look at the other big areas where we're going to dedicate 50% possibly of our sales tax revenue in those big areas to the TIF. So
right, you're talking the normal.
How does our ability to, does that make a dent in our ability to repay these sales tax bonds?
No, I mean, for one, it's incremental because it's not there now, and the way it's drafted, it's I guess I would have, it says 1/3 plus 2/3, which I always thought that was one, but forget the semantics of language, but it also allows for the carve out of all these other reimbursement agreements that you guys have done with other people. So it does factor in that, you're giving someone the direct subsidy as opposed to these bonds, but there's sufficient coverage and stuff to service this debt. It doesn't run that long, so, but there is a provision that goes around, so.
And just to add to, and Brenda can add in that, so that's part of the creation of the approach and the philosophical approach that we're having now, which is a comprehensive approach to know how each one of these decisions impacts something else. So not having these conversations about what is best for that isolated project, but every single time we bring something to you, having that what the implications are so that we can minimize unintended consequences, and we can also set ourselves up for that ongoing sustainability. Brenda, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that covers it. It's really just defining how we look at it in a total package, as City Manager Hoffman says. It's really taking into account all of those segregated. Right now, it's isolated. And so being able to see what that domino effect is and looking at that long range financial plan of how we then place that in the plan and say if we are going to allocate a certain percentage, whether it's 50% or 75% of that sales and use tax revenue, how that will then come into play as more development comes on, or if it shifts in the type of development and where that's placed. So that's just part of that comprehensive package of that we're looking at from the development matrix aspect, as well as the long range financial plan, and really tying it all together, and why it's critical for this utility rate study to also to help support what those ongoing services will be going forward, and ensuring that the rates are sufficient in order to support those services and demands. So that's why it's really imperative that we are kind of shifting more for that dynamic model as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
So, Ms. Hoffman, do you want to go ahead and talk about the timeline? I don't notice, you know.
Yes, thank you. Issuing the Windy Gap individually, we're going to be with Tom's assistants putting together a short presentation for Moody's. We're going to be scheduling a call within the next. We should solidify the call, and so Tom and I are continuing to develop our relationship. So when someone says 3 weeks out, I always say, okay, well, that's great. So by the end of this week, if we could solidify a date, that would be terrific. So we'll continue to work on that, but providing council, providing them an update. And so we want to be able to talk to them about having a change in plans for what the recurring revenues look like. Back to Tom's point that it's not just qualitative, it's also quantitative. We'll circle back with council. The firm dates that we have, the refinancing options for Broomfield's obligation, which is our second tranche of what we're doing with RBC, will be at the June 1st study session. So really June 1st study session is turning into this financial study session. Because in addition to the refinancing options that we'll bring, we'll also provide council with a draft debt policy for that conversation on June 1st at that study session, and then adoption on June 8th. Also on the June 1st is the comprehensive annual financial report. So that will also be part of that June 1st. Again, the rate study, we're almost finished with the RFP that we need to send out. We'll have that out the door within the next 2 weeks. And that again provides an independent analysis of existing rates. And then recommendations for what the tiered approach looks like. Clearly, as Councilmember Schaaf said, we have some examples of how others have implemented that. So we'll learn from that. We do anticipate from council's perspective and from the community's perspective, for anybody that's listening tonight, anytime we start talking about rate studies, we want everybody to know that the communication will be thorough. We will have a communication campaign. We will provide plenty of notice. We will indicate the why, what it's going towards. People will understand it on the front end before we roll it out, with plenty of time to begin that planning piece. So again, immediate for the follow-up for the Windy Gap individual debt that we'll be bringing back, refinancing options on June 1st, draft debt policy on June 1st with adoption on June 8th, and then we'll continue to keep you posted on the RFP on the rate study. Thank you, Mayor.
This was a pretty intense conversation. Great questions. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Jennifer. And so I guess to be continued, and we'll go ahead, and adjourn the study session, and we have more discussions on this. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And then Pat, I will work on trying to come up with some ratios for you that we've discussed before. So I will get there somehow. So.
No, completely understood, Tom. And like I said, I'm looking forward to the additional discussions tonight. I mean, like I said, as Jennifer and I talked today, none of the conclusions surprised me, and but it does have huge implications. So that's why we had the study session, and we'll follow up later. Anyway, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for your